My wife cheated on me in front of everyone, so I burned the bridge and left without looking back. The bridge, not long or wide, is a simple wooden structure that spans the narrow yet profound gap between past disappointments and future uncertainties. Let me introduce myself. I'm Lyle Jetman, now 38, a man who previously only differed from others in that he was the husband of 36-year-old Gloria and the father of 12-year-old Robert and 8-year-old Anna. It's a pleasant family picture, albeit with a significant financial burden. To meet my duties as a husband and father, I worked at Countryman Realtor for 5 years before Gabriel Zello bought the company from Bernie Schlier. Real estate wasn't my first career choice, or even my desired one. I started my career after graduating from law school. At that time, I had been married to Gloria for 3 years, and she was pregnant when I graduated. The job market for young lawyers wasn't very promising. But Gloria's pregnancy gave me a strong incentive to find a job that could support my family. The initial job I secured was at a law firm specializing in representing banks during home loan closings. It wasn't the career I had envisioned, but it was employment. While I pursued my law degree, Gloria worked as a bank teller to support us both. Her earnings covered rent and necessities, while I worked part-time jobs to supplement our income. My education was funded through loans and scholarships, but I aimed for a future with the Department of Education. Since Gloria became pregnant around my law school graduation, I accepted the job offer, marking the first of many compromises in married life. In those bygone days, banks extended loans to individual home buyers for house purchases, a profession considered gentile for lawyers. I sat at the desk handling house flipping transactions on behalf of lending institutions during mortgage closings. Buyers paid the bank a commission of roughly $500 for my services. The law firm received this sum along with an additional $500 from the insurance company. Each successful closing meant earning a solid $1,000 when we sealed the deal. Naturally, the firm profited, and I received a small portion as my salary. It seems all good things must end, and honorable frugality gives way to insatiable greed. Shortly after my wife Gloria gave birth to our second child, the consolidation of small banks into larger ones, which were then absorbed by even bigger ones, reshaped the banking landscape. Retail loans became obsolete as banking transitioned into a wholesale trade, operating at an industrial scale. Each morning I'd confront a stack of mortgage paperwork at work, slated for same-day closings, while profits likely soared. The frenetic pace of simultaneous house closings left me with an uneasy feeling about the sustainability of this model. Over my 7-year legal career, I didn't advance to partnership, but ascended to the esteemed status of a private contractor, earning $75 per closing, with 7 or 8 loans closed daily, 5 and sometimes 6 days a week. My income was respectable, however, I harbored doubts about the longevity of this arrangement. Sensing an impending downturn, Bernard Scher, or Bernie as he preferred, approached me, seeking a legally savvy individual. Bernie aimed to expand his company, Countryman Real Estate, with his main contract transitioning to the Sun Belt. Bernie eyed growth. His company held shares in the Scarlet Woods development, boasting 100 approved lots with plans for 400 more, strategically located 2 miles from a tech park with 2,000 high-tech jobs on the horizon. Bernie, a builder-developer, excelled at securing financing for growth projects. However, he struggled to market to homeowners seeking upgrades or adjustable-rate mortgages. Strangely enough, when Bernie and I first met, everything clicked. I thrived on selling houses and paid close attention to details, especially when it came to managing the flurry of paperwork involved in transactions. Drawing from lessons learned from previous employers, I implemented profit center strategies, boosting Bernie's sales by leveraging partnerships with home insurance agents, movers, gardeners, and more. We swiftly evolved into a comprehensive agency with one goal: maximizing home sales and capitalizing on associated services. Bernie wasted no time in initiating construction projects while I diligently managed day-to-day operations. He handled major deals while I took care of smaller ones, earning a handsome salary as his trusted employee. Bernie foresaw the impending crisis. Bear Stearns served as a precursor, but the collapse of investment bank Lehman Brothers was the catalyst. Despite the looming catastrophe, Bernie remained optimistic, believing in real estate's inherent resilience. While the market plummeted, Bernie remained unfazed, confident in its eventual rebound. I focused on maximizing every opportunity, channeling profits into larger and more lucrative rural properties as part of Bernie's investment strategy. Bernie had only one concern. He felt like a significant figure in a small arena and desired to dive into the vast ocean. One evening during drinks after work, he dropped the bombshell. "I've sold everything. What? Take it easy. The new owner won't shake things up, at least not right away. Once again, Bernie proved correct. Upon meeting Gabe Zell, my initial impression was of his youthfulness. Not yet 30, he orchestrated Bernie's buyout. Taller and younger than me, Gabe possessed a striking blonde-haired Adonis-like appearance, embodying the epitome of a business prodigy superstar. Though I should have felt envy toward the young man, his charm and amiability made it difficult to be resentful. Working for him proved enjoyable as well. Approaching 50, Bernie was ambitious, yet fundamentally cautious. In contrast, Gabe thrived on transparency and risk-taking. He operated with everything laid bare for all to see, always pushing the boundaries. It became evident early on that his investment in rural property had stretched his finances thin. Gabe leaned more toward financing than construction, and leaned more into management than salesmanship. He relished in quick profits, and when the real estate market rebounded, his wager on Countryman Real Estate clearly paid off. Meanwhile, Bernie headed to Florida, drawn to the allure of a large real estate venture. The night before his departure, I wished him luck. "Come with me, baby," he said. "No, I'm not a child anymore. I have a wife and 2 teenagers to support," I replied. "Okay, but someday you'll regret it." I hoped not, but I checked the job market. There's not much left of my old company. Stephen Pender, one of the junior partners, managed to weather the collapse. He was glad to hear from me, but offered only a third of my current earnings. So I worked diligently to ensure Countryman Real Estate stayed afloat. Overall, I was content working for Gabe, as we called him. He treated me well and allowed me to manage the office day to day. Did I have any doubts about him? Yes, but my only grievance with the boss was minor. Bernie never hosted a formal Christmas party, but Gabe took it to the opposite extreme. He rented one of the finest vacation spots in Saratoga, albeit during the off-season, for a hefty sum. The next party, held on the first Saturday in December, was for staff, contractors, bankers, and realtors. It was a lavish affair with a large guest list. Gabe spared no expense. Well, it was his money, and perhaps there was a legitimate business rationale behind it all. My discontent began around midnight and intensified throughout the night. You see, I arrived with the most attractive woman in the venue on my arm. I married Gloria right after college when we were both barely 22. While I was in law school, she worked a dead-end job to support us. I'll always be grateful to her for that. But she became pregnant by stopping birth control while I studied for the bar exam. In hindsight, the pregnancy may have been for the best. We've been good parents then and still are now. While I struggled with renting houses, Gloria raised our kids and worked nights to earn her doctorate in child psychology. When our youngest child started school, Gloria returned to work, landing a job at the State Department. She also embarked on what I now call her running career. Gloria could be described as chubby, especially compared to some undernourished models. But at 30, she transitioned from swimming at the YWCA pool twice a week and jogging occasionally to running long distances solo every morning. She started waking early to trek 5 miles cross-country. Each evening, she dedicated half an hour to sprinting. She held the fastest time among local female runners, and was only surpassed once by national competitors in local 5K and 10K races. She even participated in the New York City Marathon 3 times, ranking among the top 100 women finishers. I'm not a stay-at-home type. I hit the gym at least 3 times a week and bike 20 miles on summer weekends. However, with over 5% body fat, I don't boast a physique sculpted by Michelangelo. I stood by Gloria in her endeavors, witnessing her early morning routines and returning sweaty as I woke the children. I felt proud of my wife, so when I entered the Christmas party with this tall, dark-haired beauty on my arm, conversations hushed and heads turned to behold the striking Gloria. Standing just over 6 feet tall in her 3-inch heels, she matched my height perfectly. Her raven locks cascaded over her shoulders, shimmering in the ballroom lamplight that evening. Despite her efforts to attend the party, Gloria wore a new, form-fitting black dress. The scallop-trimmed attire hinted at her cleavage and was daringly short, showcasing her fabulously long runner's legs. This dress accentuated her flat stomach and sculpted rear, drawing admiring gazes. No longer a chubby girl, my wife exuded confidence as a remarkable woman. In Gabe's arms, she wasted no time in greeting us and joining him for a dance. Although I couldn't deny they made a lovely couple, his attentiveness seemed to border on inappropriate. Shortly before midnight, he approached her and kissed her passionately beneath the mistletoe. Well, I wasn't jealous. Yes, my wife was attractive, but I trusted her. We had weathered many hardships together, from years of law school to raising children and paying off school loans. We had overcome illness and feticide. I felt sorry for couples who hadn't faced such trials together. It's adversity that strengthens a marriage. Gloria and I had faced everything together and remained deeply in love. As Gloria reveled in the attention while drinking, I dismissed it all as the result of the festive atmosphere. I escorted my wife home, and we didn't discuss the incident further. It was just an effect of too much hard drink, I reassured myself. 6 months later, Memorial Day weekend rolled around, marking the halfway point of the year, which had been favorable for the real estate sector with a notable increase in clients. The final week of May experienced record-breaking heat, setting the hottest temperatures in the past decade. The company's operating account brimmed with cash from home sales scheduled for deposit on the first business day of June. We planned to review the checks and electronically pay the banks when the office reopened after the 3-day weekend. "Are you joining us for the weekend camping trip?" Gabe inquired. He had rented a mountain cabin in the Adirondacks for Memorial Day weekend and had been talking about it incessantly for weeks. Though his invitation extended to Gloria and me, I was hesitant. "I'm not sure what Gloria's plans are," I replied, attempting to decline politely. "Oh, she's coming. She's looking forward to it," Gabe insisted confidently. I regarded him with uncertainty. "We discussed it on the phone," he added hastily. Why did I doubt him? Nevertheless, after he departed, I called Gloria, and indeed she was enthusiastic about the trip. Reflecting on it now, I realized that this was the pivotal moment to avert disaster, but I failed to recognize it. I loved Gloria deeply and trusted her implicitly. According to MapQuest, the journey to Gabe's house would be challenging. I traded my Honda Accord for a 4-wheel drive SUV at the rental place. The last 20 miles of the route were along mountain roads, with the final 3 miles on dirt tracks. Having visited the Adirondack Mountains before, I knew firsthand their rugged nature. Gabe's residence lay southwest of Saranac Lake, and the journey took nearly 4 hours. The GPS guided us for the last 5 miles, leading us off the beltway onto the final 2 miles of semi-paved road that terminated at a sturdy wooden bridge. Though narrow, the recently renovated bridge spanned a ravine. While not excessively wide, the gap was deep, characteristic of the terrain typical of the Adirondack Mountains. It's such challenging terrain that preserves their untamed wilderness. I traversed the bridge cautiously, contemplating if there might be another route available. Despite the absence of an alternate exit on the GPS map, I felt like a mouse ensnared in a trap, wondering if there might be a lurking carnivore nearby. 3 miles along a rugged dirt road, we arrived at a 2-story house nestled on a clearing on the mountainside, roughly 1,000 feet below the summit. A dozen Adirondack peaks loomed to the north, providing a picturesque backdrop to this remote location, where what appeared to be a rustic cabin had been erected. I parked the SUV in a meticulously maintained parking lot adjacent to 3 similarly upscale vehicles. Everything appeared pristine and meticulously tended to. The cabin itself exemplified the modern log building aesthetic that evoked rustic charm while boasting contemporary comforts. Adorned in a fusion of modern and traditional paneling, it exuded the ambiance of a 19th-century mountain retreat, albeit with modern conveniences. It was evident that Gabe had spared no expense to create this illusion. I had little doubt about his intended audience for such ostentation, and it certainly wasn't me. We were welcomed on the expansive porch, adorned with Adara chairs and rustic decor, by a group of 6 individuals. Among them were 3 young men, Gabe and 2 of his college acquaintances. Ken Lewis, the shortest among them at about 5 feet 10 inches, possessed a muscular physique akin to a weightlifter nearing his 32nds. Though starting to bald like Gabe, Ken's rugged features were accentuated by his muscular frame, visible beneath his tight t-shirt and shorts. The second college friend, Glenn Sachs, stood at roughly 6 feet tall, slender with curly blonde hair. He appeared more aesthetically pleasing than Ken, his arms wrapped around a blonde woman introduced as Sharon. Sharon exuded beauty with her voluptuous figure, ample bust, likely in her 32nds, possibly older, and noticeably 8 to 10 years Glenn's senior. Standing beside Ken was Robin, a slightly younger woman, clearly accompanying him. She possessed a bubbly demeanor, short stature, and a well-endowed physique, with a bosom seemingly disproportionate to her petite frame. The final member of the group stood tall with flowing brown hair. She was Paula Henry, one of those individuals often described as beautiful, possessing attractive yet sharply defined, not entirely feminine features. Her demeanor suggested intelligence, a trait acknowledged by herself and others. Clearly the youngest among the women, she was a schoolmate of the boys. Despite the warm and overly enthusiastic welcome we received, there was an air of peculiarity, Gabe specifically greeted my wife with enthusiasm, while I received a more perfunctory acknowledgement. Meanwhile, his friend Paula regarded me with a scrutinizing gaze, akin to one observing a laboratory specimen before dissection. Dinner arrangements were swiftly made, prompting us to hastily stow our belongings in our designated second-floor bedroom, adjacent to Gabe's master suite. Seated in the expansive great hall, serving as a combined living room, dining area, and game room, we indulged in gourmet microwave meals around the grand oak table. Though the food was delectable, it was evident that it came with considerable expense and minimal effort. Wine flowed generously, and I monitored my intake, mindful of my host's persistent attempts to replenish our glasses. Post-dinner, the group congregated around the gas fireplace on the terrace, where potent drinks and herb made an appearance, setting the tone for a weekend characterized by merry and mild use. As I navigated through the situation with careful inquiry and astute observation, what initially seemed like a typical holiday weekend with my boss, his friends, and their partners took on a more intricate undertone. It soon became apparent that Robin had a fiancé elsewhere, while Sharon was married with 2 children and a husband waiting at home. Infidelity was treated with casual disregard and even humor. Paula remained fixated on me, seemingly detached from the group. Although she appeared to be aligned with Gabe, she showed no offense at his overt flirtation with my wife. Throughout the night, Gabe positioned himself mostly between Gloria and Paula, directing most of his conversation toward Gloria. My attempts to engage Paula were met with polite but distant interest, signaling me to refrain from further interaction. As midnight approached, the guests, still in high spirits, seemed prepared to retire for the night, yet an unspoken anticipation lingered. Suddenly, Gabe addressed me, acknowledging my probable fatigue from the lengthy drive. "Are you ready for bed, Lyle?" Gloria suggested, to which I jokingly insisted on another drink, offering it to Gabe. Internally, I fumed at Gabe's attempts to seduce my wife, questioning Gloria's behavior throughout the evening. Was she truly enamored with him? It was a night of waiting, but ultimately, I emerged victorious. Returning to our designated room, Gloria entered the shower alone, and I refrained from joining her, recognizing the futility. Upon her exit, she sat undressed on the edge of the bed, inviting me to join her. "I want to enjoy this weekend," she expressed, reflecting on our challenging past and acknowledging my unwavering support. "You've been an exceptional partner and parent, sacrificing for my education and nurturing our family. Your dedication has not gone unnoticed. I'm proud to be your wife." I woke to the morning sunlight flooding through the open blinds of the spacious bedroom window. Typically, Gloria rose much earlier than I did for my morning jog, but last night's indulgence in hard drinks and banter had its effects. Rising from bed, I drew the curtain shut and made my way to the compact bathroom with a shower. Despite its size, the bathroom boasted ample amenities. After showering and shaving, I headed downstairs before the others had stirred, opting to explore the surroundings, while the house was still quiet. Moving from the main room to a patio featuring a fire pit and built-in outdoor barbecue, I then ventured onto a raised terrace housing a small pool and sauna. Considering the chilly spring climate of these mountains, an open water feature seemed risky. But as I stepped onto the terrace, I discovered the entire area was heated. Solar panels adorned the higher slopes of the mountain, heating both the pool and likely the house. Crossing the terrace, I reached what appeared to be a small barn, devoid of animals but stocked with ATVs, snowmobiles, and gardening tools, including several small tractors. As I passed by, the distant sound of a babbling stream caught my attention. About 20 yards behind a locked barn, with a chimney protruding from its roof, I glimpsed through a small window, spotting a generator and fuel tanks. It was evident that meticulous care was taken to ensure the provision of gasoline for recreational vehicles and emergency power through the generator. This location felt like its own secluded universe, evidently prepared for any conceivable scenario. Despite the stream appearing small and shallow, I reconsidered its size when witnessing a fish leap from its waters. "Are you fishing?" came a voice from behind me. Turning, I found Paula standing there. "Not today, but I used to when I had more free time. Seems like this weekend might offer you that chance." "Are you into fishing?" I inquired. "No, like you, I lack the time. Perhaps we could have breakfast and then take a hike up the mountain. It'd be a shame to come all this way and not reach the summit," she suggested. Paula prepared coffee in the stainless steel maker, while the kitchen pantry held microwave-ready breakfast options. Opting for instant oatmeal, I noticed none of the others had yet stirred. They'd likely sleep in. "How about that hike?" she proposed, smiling. With Paula evidently knowing the trail's beginning, she led us straight to it. Initially, the summit didn't seem too far, but an hour later, it felt as distant as when we began. "Are you sure about reaching the top?" I questioned. "Why quit now, old man?" she teased. I'm just thinking about what the others will say when they find us missing. Don't worry, I doubt they'll mind. Finally reaching the summit, the sun position nearly overhead indicated noon was nearing. The mountain's peak was somewhat underwhelming, with a flat area bordered by rounded edges. 2 weathered wooden benches faced east, offering views of the guest house and several distant peaks to the south and east. Though the fog obscured distant vistas, the air felt crisp and pure. Seating herself, Paula appeared content to soak in the view. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. "I'd like to rest before heading back down." "No, the old man could use a rest," I responded, prompting a smile from her. "So, Glenn is a broker, Ken is a banker, and Gabe is a developer, but despite talking all night, I never found out what you do," I remarked, eyeing her thoughtfully. She seemed to weigh the question, assessing the potential consequences. "I'm an inspector. I work for the government. It's a low-paying and rather dull job," she divulged. "Have you inspected anyone we know?" I inquired. "Not recently. Back in college, it felt like I was always bailing them out, covering for them with angry girlfriends or providing cheat sheets for exams. They were always on the edge. That's what makes them who they are, you know." "Extraordinary young people," she explained. "So is this your job now, covering for them? What's the point of closing the barn door after the horse is bolted? It won't help you retrieve your horse. Rules just hold things back. It's better if smart people rise to the top and the rest step aside. Ultimately, everyone benefits according to their own merits," I mused. "What about your role this weekend?" "You didn't attend the party last night," I pointed out. She fell silent, caught off guard by the question. I rose and moved to where I could see the road leading down the mountain. There was only one way out, the way out. Turning back to Paula, I scrutinized her. Had she considered this? The others, I realized in a moment of insight, were entirely oblivious to anything beyond their own physical desires. But was she? Clearly she was observant. She must see the issue as I did. "I'm just here as the designated sober one. I ensure everything runs smoothly, intervening only if absolutely necessary," she explained. "Meaning unless the Golden Boys need you," I summarized. "I wouldn't put it like that, but I certainly prioritize what's best for them. For everyone in the long run," she clarified. "Shall we head downstairs?" I suggested. "What's the rush?" "The journey back will be quicker," she remarked. "Yes, quicker, but the slope is steep and perhaps more perilous. You could take a nasty fall," I cautioned. "Why worry when you're already at the top?" she retorted, though she rose and began to descend. We returned to the lodge without incident, yet my concerns intensified. Finding the others by the pool, I was taken aback by my wife's appearance in a black bikini, revealing her body in a manner I hadn't seen before. The other women were similarly clad. As Paula and I approached, I witnessed my wife seated on Gabe's lap, engaged in a passionate kiss. "We're back!" Paula's shout interrupted Gabe and Gloria's kiss. Gabe grinned mischievously, while Gloria's smile seemed forced. "Where have you two been?" Gloria asked casually, breaking the awkward silence. My fists clenched instinctively, but Paula squeezed my hand. "Well, since we missed lunch and conquered the mountain, we deserve some food," Paula declared, pulling me towards the cabin. As we left the pool area, I heard muted laughter. I wasn't sure what Paula had prepared, and if I ate anything I couldn't recall. She handed me a glass of straight black Johnny Walker, which burned as it went down. "Think before you act," she advised. "It's just one weekend in a good marriage, and you need to consider your family." Returning to the pool, the couples were already settled in the jacuzzi, laughing and giggling. My wife remained seated on Gabe's lap. I couldn't see their hands underwater, but I assumed they were occupied. A joint was passed around, and it was evident that everyone was intoxicated. Paula positioned herself where she could keep an eye on things, placing herself between the jacuzzi and me. I pretended to drink more before discreetly walking away. Out of sight, I poured out the contents of my glass. It was a strange mix of jealousy and pride. I was proud of my wife's transformation from the chubby girl I married to the beautiful, athletic woman she had become, rightfully desired by others. I took pride in the fact that men longed to be in her loving, strong arms. But what about her inner self? As she sculpted her physique, seeing her with Gabe had an oddly alluring quality. I could picture their flawless bodies entwined, physically a nightmarish yet exhilarating image. I strolled around the lodge grounds, observing its operations, passing time while dreading the direction things seemed to be heading, realizing that ultimately, I might need to take control of my options. Entering our bedroom, I made a deliberate attempt to sleep. As I lay there trying to quiet my mind, the question of why my wife was flirting and kissing another man lingered. We had weathered many hardships. Together, from our early struggles with poverty to our children's illnesses, and the constant financial strain of living on a middle-class income. We were finally starting to climb towards stability. Our children had reached an age of independence, my wife had a modest but steady career, and I was earning a good income. After years of financial struggle, our debts were manageable, and our future looked promising. So why risk it for someone as shallow and empty as Gabe? Strip away his charm and boldness, and there was nothing substantial. Gabe had never designed a site plan, built or sold a home. He was the figurehead of a business run by others, a wealthy individual with no real substance, a prodigy whose only asset was his image. What was Gloria thinking? She claimed she just wanted to have fun this weekend. Was this her idea of fun, and how would it end? I must have fallen asleep because when I descended the stairs, they had already gathered in the main room. Lunch had passed, but the drinks were still flowing, and joints were being passed around. Gloria was back in Gabe's lap, and there was no denying they had kissed. The women had removed their bikini tops, including Paula, who seemed to be sharing Ken with Robin. I headed straight for the kitchen to heat up dinner in the microwave. When Gloria walked in, "How are you?" she asked. "It could have been better," I replied. There was a moment of hesitation before she spoke again. "I spent the evening with Gabe," she confessed. "I noticed," I said as the microwave beeped. She gave a strange smile when I turned to attend to the microwave. "No, I mean, tonight, in his room." I remained very still, facing away from her, not wanting her to see the pain she was causing. "I see. But what about our 16 years of marriage?" I questioned. "That's why I can do this. It's only for the weekend. Next week, I'll be all yours again," she assured. "And Gabe won't mind?" I retorted. She hugged me from behind, burying her head against my back. "Gabe likes you. He thinks you two are going somewhere. It's just a fling, a little fun for the weekend, okay?" she asked, her words punctuated by hugs. "Can I choose?" I inquired. "Not really, it's decided. I'm just letting you know," she replied. She released me, and I heard her leave the kitchen. I walked to where the kitchen opened into the main room. They were already heading up the stairs. Gabe glanced back, smiling and giving me a thumbs up, as if we were on the same page. He whispered something to Gloria, who turned around, waved, and smiled at me. I returned to the kitchen, feeling as though everything we had been through together meant nothing. My wife had left me and humiliated me. I discarded the food from the microwave and made coffee instead. It was going to be a long night. As the water started to boil, I heard footsteps entering the kitchen. I turned to find Paula observing me. "I didn't expect there to be caffeine. Wouldn't something else be better?" she queried. "Everyone has their preferences," I replied. "But tell me, what's your role here?" She shrugged in response. "I'm just trying to ensure things remain calm." "And how do you plan to do that, by sleeping with me?" She chuckled. "No, I wouldn't go that far. But don't lose hope. You'll have your wife back, and maybe even a bonus." "So there's money involved," I noted. "Isn't it always the case? You can't make waves when you work for this man. You have to consider your family. What choice do you have but to accept what's offered? This is their world, not yours. That's just how it goes." A sharp moan of pleasure echoed from above. "Seems like she's having a good time," Paula grinned. "Well, good for her. A delightful weekend for everyone in the mountains. You know, these rocks have stood here for ages. Our existence is merely a fleeting moment for them. Thousands of years ago, they were buried under layers of ice that carved through them, forming the rivers and gorges we now navigate to make our world livable. Sometimes we forget how fragile our existence is. Remove one small piece, and our world crumbles. Only then do we realize it's all an illusion." Paula laughed. "Wow, you're quite the philosopher." "No, just someone who understands what truly matters, striving to discern the genuine from the fleeting illusions." She probably assumed I wouldn't stir up any trouble, leaving me alone with my coffee and my anguish. Around 1 a.m, I ascended the stairs, passing the master bedroom door. I was greeted by loud screams and pleasure-filled moans from my wife. She had always been quiet during our carnal moments, but it seemed he brought her more satisfaction. Younger and more vigorous, he excelled in every aspect. It appeared my wife had found the pleasure she sought in his embrace. I showered and changed into warm attire, anticipating the cold outside. I tried to drown out the noises echoing through the walls as I waited. By the time silence finally descended upon the house, it was well past 3 a.m. Waiting another 30 minutes, I ventured downstairs. In a kitchen cabinet, I discovered a flashlight and candles with matches. A prudent measure, I reasoned, in case reality severed our connection to electricity. The night enveloped the surroundings in profound darkness. With the moon having already set, the nocturnal symphony of the mountains, though, felt like silence to someone accustomed to city life. I easily located the barn and a 20-gallon plastic canister filled with motorsports gas. A wrench lay nearby. Though a padlock secured the generator shed door, the hinge mechanism had succumbed to rust. The wrench swiftly liberated it. The house's owners had thoughtfully provided a manual gasoline pump, enabling me to swiftly fill the canister in less than 10 minutes. I navigated around the lodge to reach my rented SUV's parking spot. I loaded the gas can into the back, released the handbrake, and shifted the transmission into drive, allowing the car to roll downhill. I started it up and drove off cautiously. As I neared the bridge, carefully navigating it, I halted upon reaching the gravel road. Taking my time, I ensured the gasoline seeped into the bridge's wood. It was a meticulously crafted structure, a testament to skilled artisans who took pride in their work. Regular folks had built this bridge to facilitate the leisure of those who profited off the toil of others. But the fun was about to come to an abrupt end. Dropping the match, it sputtered before igniting. Flames swiftly erupted, and I quickly retreated as a fierce explosion of heat and fire ensued. The wooden bridge crackled and collapsed into the inferno, its blaze likely visible for miles around. Turning back to my car, I drove away leisurely. There was no need to hurry. Anyone who witnessed the fire was now stranded on the other side. I was confident I'd be long gone before they realized their predicament. By the time dawn broke, I was already stopping at a gas station off the highway, filling up the SUV. I left the empty canister at the pumps, certain someone would eventually collect it. Any link between the fire and me would vanish. Returning the SUV around 9 a.m., I retrieved my car. After showering and dressing casually for the office, I had two final tasks: to sever ties with Countryman Real Estate. Bernie, though a good boss, was forgetful, often leaving items in his office. With keys to every door and filing cabinet, I had easy access. Gabe, meticulous with his belongings, kept the combination to his desk safe in a folder labeled "Security," stored in a locked closet. Thanks to Bernie's keys, I gained entry and retrieved the password diary from the safe. Accessing the company's personal account, it would have been simple to abscond with everything, but that wasn't my intent. Theft would only lead to trouble. Instead, I transferred the operating account to another. Initially, when I joined Countrymen, we established a trust account for deposits as per state regulations. Over time, new trust accounts were created for each project, while the original was forgotten. Although the previous account was archived, it wasn't recorded in the ledgers. It remained empty until I injected nearly $20 million into it, safeguarding all our cash. I bolstered our line of credit as a precaution, ensuring my actions didn't seem hollow. Nothing was stolen, everything remained intact. However, it would take days to locate and return the funds. In the wee hours of Tuesday morning, electronic transfers will hit an empty account, halting hundreds of payments. Unsure of the extent of the damage, our reliance on credit left us vulnerable. Remove that lifeline, and we'll face tough times, at least temporarily. It'll be an uphill battle for Countrymen to rebuild their creditworthiness. The longer the shortfall persists, the more dire the situation becomes. With luck, Gabe will still be away in the mountains on Tuesday. Once all is set, I'll print my resignation letter before departing the office. As I was about to leave, placing the letter on Gabe's secretary's desk, my cell buzzed. Glancing at the screen, I saw Gloria's photo, but I let it go to voicemail, though I couldn't resist listening. "Where are you, baby? The car's missing and I'm worried sick. Call me," her voice pleaded. About 30 minutes later, Gabe called. "Hey, Lyle, you okay?" "Gloria is frantic. Call her," he urged, with a hint of threat at the end. Oddly, it amused me. On Sunday, Gloria called 3 times, with 2 more calls from Gabe, the latter sounding more forceful, insisting I get in touch. Monday morning, I fetched the kids from Gloria's parents. As I left, Gloria called again. "Be home tonight. We need to talk. If you get this call, I'm really worried," she implored. "This is childish," she added. I doubted she'd return to her parents. They were expecting me. Gloria called again, saying, "You might be on your own picking up the kids." Her mother urged me to call while her father suggested waiting until she returned. "There are things we need to sort out," he remarked. Personally, I aimed to steer clear of familial debates. They weren't pleased, but there wasn't much they could do. My daughter sensed tension, but I assured her, "This is between Mom and me. We'll discuss it when she returns." Out of fairness to her, after settling the kids in, I retreated to our old bedroom and dialed Felix Rodriguez. "How's it going, Lyle?" he greeted. "Not great, Felix. I need your expertise," I confided. Felix, a top-notch family lawyer and stand-up guy, listened attentively. "What's going on?" he inquired. "I need to file for divorce," I stated firmly. We delved into details over an hour, scheduling an appointment for late Tuesday to kickstart the process. Meanwhile, calls persisted from the mountains. It seems her parents got in touch with her. The tone of the messages changed. Gloria and Gabe reached out without threats. Hey, if I messed up, I apologize. Let's not let this weekend affect our professional relationship. It wouldn't be good for anyone if you catch my drift, Gabe stated. Later, around 5 p.m., Gloria reached out urgently. Lyle, please call. Something's happened here. There's no bridge. We're all stuck. Call me. I need to talk, she urged. Bright and early Tuesday, I rang up Stephen Pender, my old buddy. We arranged to meet for lunch at a nearby diner. Are you sure about this? Stephen mused between bites. Done deal. I've officially resigned, I affirmed. As if to emphasize, Donna, my former secretary at Countryman, called. Lyle, they're saying you've resigned, but you've got to come in. Everything's going haywire. Something's seriously off. Donna relayed. Sorry, I can't. I'm no longer with the company. You should ring up Gabe. They say he's stranded in the mountains. Something about a bridge, huh? Tough break. Don't worry, though. It'll all work out. Anything else I should know? Steve inquired. Nope. Not my concern anymore, I replied. Well, if you're sure, I think I can up my last offer by $10,000 a year. Can you start tomorrow? Isn't that too soon? Nope. Perfect, Steve confirmed. Wednesday morning, I joined Pender and Partners. Just settling in that afternoon, I had an unexpected visitor. Where's my money? You're an idiot, Gabe Zell stormed in. What money are you talking about? You know, operating funds. Sorry, you might want to chat with the company accountants. If I do that, I'll sue you for embezzlement, he threatened. I just smirked. He found his way down that mountain, but where are the operational funds? You think you're some hotshot lawyer, but you're just an idiot who can't satisfy his wife. She really enjoyed her time with me, and I'll keep her happy whenever I feel like it, he spat, then stormed off. The next day, the police called me to the station for questioning. Sorry, I've just started a new job. My time's tight, but I can respond to your questions in writing and call you back, I offered. The officer tried to explain they don't usually do that, but I insisted, citing my profession. After some back and forth, he hung up. I anticipated the police would need to investigate the embezzlement claim. Tracing the money, they'd find it in the company account where I deposited it days ago. I figured that would be the end of it, a civil matter at most and an unsuccessful one. I was mistaken. It took them a fortnight to track down the missing funds. By then, Countryman was in dire straits. Its credit had been completely cut off by the banks, necessitating an infusion of new capital to reopen. It was only a matter of time before Gabe and the others crumbled under pressure. Gloria arrived late Friday evening with both our trip suitcases. Her key no longer worked due to my changing the locks. I met her at the door. Please, Lai, let me in. Think about the children, if not for me, she pleaded. No, you don't live here anymore. I parked your car on the street. I assume you still have the keys, I replied. Do you hate me that much? Yes, I affirmed, closing the door. I decided she would go to her parents. I instructed Felix to serve her with a restraining order and file for divorce. The brief reprieve the bridge provided paid off handsomely. With Felix's help, she was kept away, and I gained temporary custody of the children. It took her 2 months, and likely every penny she had to get back on her feet. By then, the divorce proceedings were well underway, needing only finalization. Gabe Zell wasn't as fortunate. Countryman Real Estate had to shut down, ceasing operations right after Labor Day. The following week, I had an unexpected visitor. He sat in the visitor's chair upon my return from closing the third deal, with a deep tan and looking healthy. He was lightly dressed for the northern autumn. Bernie, how's it going? I greeted. I'm doing all right, he replied, scanning my modest office. What brings you to the cold north? I inquired, sensing this was no casual visit. Well, here's the thing. Florida's swarming with sharks and most of them aren't in the water. I figured I'd stick to what I know, he explained. I'm glad to see you back, I said, uncertain of his intentions. Bernie read my expression. I took a hit down there starting over, but it seems I got lucky. This company I own seems affordable, he revealed, a smile appearing. We exchanged knowing smiles. So, what's on your mind, old pirate? I asked. Well, here's the deal. I need a partner. At my age, bankers doubt any venture I start will last, and, well, you and I make a good team. What do you say? He proposed. I have very little money. You've probably heard about my impending divorce, I mentioned. Yes, I have, he acknowledged, hinting at the spreading gossip. Let's go with, he offered. 50. Let's be reasonable. You said you're strapped for cash, but I'll settle for, I countered. Look, 25% is fair, but it's not enough. How about 40% and an option to buy another 10% in 10 years? He negotiated. All right, let's hope I live to see it, I quipped, knowing he'd likely outlast me. Bernie and I were back in business. We acquired every lot owned by Countrymen at a discount, using the same bank's funds. I anticipated challenges. But our business quickly thrived, constructing and selling homes. Life progressed as usual, as did my divorce proceedings. It largely centered on custody and visitation. Ultimately, we devised a complex joint custody and visitation arrangement. That's why I returned to a dark, empty house on Christmas Eve. Gloria had taken the children for Christmas, though I was supposed to have them. Given that Christmas fell on a Sunday, they had to return to her on Monday, her day off. The kids struggled with this routine. Approaching the house, I spotted a figure on the steps, sheltered from the cold and the light snowfall. I was beside her before recognizing my ex-wife, Gloria. "What are you doing here?" I inquired. She didn't seem well, thinner than before. Her eyes appeared vacant and indifferent. It was evident she had recently cried. "I want to go home," she whimpered. "Where are the children?" I asked, sidestepping her request. "With my parents. They want to come home too. We want to be a family again, in our little house. What you did to us is unfair." "I didn't do anything like that." "Well, yes, that's true. I made a mistake, okay? It was a bad and hurtful mistake, but it was just one mistake. You're the one who tore our family apart," she accused, her voice tinged with anger. Making a conscious effort to regain composure, she said, "I promised myself I wouldn't lose my temper, but you need to understand I struggle with anger because of this." "You have anger issues?" I was surprised. "Don't act innocent. That's not who you are. Were you just ahead of the game?" "I'm not naive, Lyle. You were never a saint. I know I hurt you, but it was never intentional." "Do you honestly expect me to believe that sleeping with another man right in front of me wouldn't hurt?" I replied. She turned away, clearly wounded by my words. I watched as she wiped her eyes, her back now facing me. It was evident she was crying. I was always the overweight one, the last choice on the dance floor. I had to settle for whoever showed interest. I was a good girl, enduring countless insults. I waited all through high school and most of college for the right person. When I met you, I thought I had found him. I was a maid when we got married. I didn't make a fuss about it, but I assumed you knew. You weren't a prince then, and you certainly aren't now. You were just an ordinary guy, but I loved you with all my heart. Yes, you were a bit sharper and more ambitious than the rest, but we were always struggling financially. I learned to adjust my expectations because of my love for you. It pained me to witness your constant struggles. Then Gabriel entered the picture, and suddenly everything seemed to improve. He possessed all the qualities a woman desires in a man. This time, the prince had his eyes on me. It was incredibly flattering. After the Christmas party, he kept reaching out to me. It wasn't serious, just harmless flirting. You know, attractive women often receive attention like that. I've been approached before, but never by someone from the beautiful and powerful elite. He spoke highly of you and expressed how fortunate I am to have such an amazing boyfriend like you. I bet he was just enamored with me, I remarked. Exactly. He mentioned how hard you work and how he wants to reward you. I understood his implications. If I played nice with him, he would take care of you. I suppose I let him convince me that you would benefit if I gave in to him. And it's true, there was a part of me that desired him. It felt like there was this irrational urge guiding me toward him. I was torn between hoping something would happen over the weekend and fearing it. But once we arrived, my resistance began to fade. I turned to you and confessed. "What, are you serious? You told me you were considering sleeping with him." Okay, I didn't say it outright, but you knew what was going on and you didn't object," she said, turning to me. Tears streamed down her cheeks, dripping from her chin, and her nose was running. "I trusted you. We've spent 16 years together. How could you betray me like this?" I lamented. "But that's the crux of it. We loved each other. It was merely a fleeting affair. It pales in comparison to what we shared before and what lies ahead. Are you so deluded to think that after hearing your cries of pleasure for him, we can salvage anything meaningful? Oh, for heaven's sake. You can't be that naive. It was all a facade. I aimed to please him. I put on quite a performance. Individuals like him demand and anticipate such theatrics. That's not how I behave in bed. And after 16 years of closeness with me, you should know that. All I know is what you did, how you degraded me. You chose the golden boy over me, the cat who offers nothing and takes everything. Powerful, isn't it? So where is he now? What happened when the crisis hit? I'll tell you everything. He folded under pressure. We live in a society that perpetuates the dominance of the few over the many, based on the myth of some hidden brilliance they possess. Explain to me, how did this genius manage to descend the mountain so swiftly? He called for a helicopter. By then, he suspected that you had tampered with the business. It was glaringly obvious that you had sabotaged the bridge. He thought you embezzled his funds. The others began to panic. Paula insisted that this couldn't be true, that it couldn't happen like that. When the helicopter arrived, there was only space for Gabe. The rest resigned. I believe the National Guard eventually erected a temporary bridge to rescue us. Sharon and I reconciled. By then, her husband had already discovered the truth. She faced consequences just like me. Poor Robin's fiancé called off the engagement. Glenn and Ken encountered trouble, but I think they managed to resolve it with Paula's assistance. It seems it was only Gabe and us regular folks who truly bore the brunt of it all. But wasn't the pain sufficient? She asked, peering at me with hope. Gloria's words held a lot of truth. I wasn't entirely blameless. I toiled for Gabe, yet unlike the rest of the world, I never aligned myself with him. I knew the truth but refused to acknowledge it to myself. I can't overlook how it transpired. They were nothing but empty promises. If scrutinized closely, one could discern a trap, but no one looked. Illusion proved more enticing than reality. We weathered through tough times, and they passed with time. What you and Gabe stripped from me was the sanctuary of my home. I'll never regain it because those scoundrels demonstrated that what I believed in was a mirage. You and I were an illusion. With that said, I rose and made for the door of the dim, vacant house. She persisted. Answer me this, she implored. Would you prefer solitude without me, or would you rather be with me and our children around the Christmas tree tonight? I gazed at her. It would be effortless to embrace her, cherish her, bring the children back to sleep in their own beds on Christmas Eve, and pretend that what occurred never did. But all I could muster was, that's a valid question, but I lack an answer. With those words, we turned away from each other. The past cannot be altered. We must forge ahead for our future.
My wife got pregnant while I was infertile, so I exposed her and served her divorce papers. We spent 2 years together in college and got married the fall after we graduated. We spent 2 years exploring our relationship, finally got settled down, and were ready to raise a family. She got off birth control and her libido took off, but it took 3 years for us to get pregnant. We got a beautiful girl, finally. After a couple of months, my wife got back on birth control and had a hard time with it. Her doctor switched her meds several times, but she had bad side effects with each one. We talked about it and were unsure if we wanted another child. Since it was easier for me to get a vasectomy reversed later if we decided to have more children, I had the operation. That was 3 years ago. After coming off birth control, my wife felt better, and sex has been worry-free since we can no longer get pregnant. We actually have sex more now than when we were in college. Then, 3 weeks ago, my wife was late for her period, which isn't that unusual for her. Then I noticed her breasts were a little tender, and she started showing signs of what seemed like morning sickness. Now, I know there have been cases of nature reversing vasectomies, so I went to the doctor and had my sperm count checked. The verdict was, I'm still sterile. But I didn't tell my wife. My wife finally went to her doctor and confirmed she was pregnant, and so she had me go to my doctor to get tested. I didn't go right away because I was literally sick from the stress of the situation. I had all sorts of sick scenarios going through my head. In the end, I got retested, and I took my daughter in and had a DNA test done. I got both test results back today and got violently ill after reading them. Yes, I am sterile, and no, my daughter isn't mine. When my wife got home, I showed her my test, and she denied any wrongdoing, saying that there was a problem with the test. I showed her the test from last week, and she broke down crying. I finally got it out of her who she had slept with, and that it only happened once, and the condom must have failed. I made her tell me the story 3 times. And each time I asked her if that was the whole truth and if there was anything else that she needed to tell me because another lie would mean we were through. She said that was the only time, and she had never done anything like that before. I told her how much this hurt me and asked her how she could do this to our family and if it was worth it. I asked her if she wanted a divorce, and she pleaded with me to forgive her and put this behind us. I said I couldn't raise someone else's child and asked her if she would be willing to terminate the pregnancy in order to stay together. She cried the rest of the night, but when we went to bed, she said she would do whatever it took to save our marriage. I never brought up the DNA test. I will contact a lawyer next week to see what my options are about whether I have to pay child support on our first child. If she had come clean about the father of our first child, I could have swallowed my pride and tried to work to forgive her. But she thought she was in the clear and didn't need to confess to anything else. Now, no telling what I'll never know. Lawyer update: my lawyer is awesome. She had me bring in a bunch of paperwork, bank statements, and my medical and DNA results and had me tell her my story. Her assistant sat in with us and took notes while my lawyer went through my documents. After I finished, she asked a few questions and spelled out my options. I live in an at-fault state, which is good and bad. Good as in it gives us leverage, bad as it takes longer and is much more expensive. In the case of the first child, if my wife agrees to sign the papers, my liability for child support is an easy fix. If she doesn't agree, then a court-ordered DNA test and a judgment from the court can remove me without my wife's consent. Either way, I will most likely not have to pay child support. One way is just more expensive than the other. Since my wife has a good job and earns close to what I do, she didn't think the judge would award her any alimony, and all of that, plus dividing up property and other things, can be negotiated before a judge gets involved. The bad news was that due to the holidays, they couldn't have the papers ready before Christmas, but definitely would before the end of the year. She advised me to say nothing until she got served. She gave me a list of things to do before and after Christmas before they served my wife. One thing they did point out was that since we were already actively trying to have a baby, there was a possibility that my wife didn't know that the child wasn't mine. My wife has an appointment with her OB tomorrow. Let's check with the community for some thoughts. Community thoughts first up: divorce her. She is one of the worst human beings. You don't deserve such a betrayal. You will regret it if you do not divorce her. She is selfish and a BH, effing around and not even giving you the real answers. Your first daughter is also not yours, right? And the second one also. Someone else adds, paternity fraud should be a crime. Your wife may have been carrying on this affair since before you were together. I'm sure she sees security with you but gets off on the sex with her affair partner. If it's been going on for this long, that's a whole separate life she is living. You should do your best to find out who and let his wife-girlfriend know. You can look into having your name removed from the birth certificates so you will not be held responsible for paying for someone else's child. If you're going to stay, then the bio dad should be made to pay child support. If I were in your shoes, I would blow up this relationship and start over with someone who respects and loves you for who you are. Enough. You spend years building a life together, get a vasectomy to simplify things, and then boom, she's pregnant, but not by you. Who knew exploring our relationship meant she'd take it literally and invite other explorers along for the ride? The fact that you kept it together long enough to get those DNA tests is impressive. I'd have probably self-destructed just from the suspense. And then finding out your daughter isn't yours? That's a double whammy right there. At least now you know what to give your wife for Christmas, a paternity test kit. Your lawyer sounds like the MVP here, guiding you through this minefield. Maybe you should start taking notes from her on how to deal with relationships, though I'd recommend a return policy on any future kids. It might be time to blow up this relationship and start fresh with someone who doesn't see family planning as a group activity. At least that way, you can avoid any more unexpected guest stars in your life story. Update: so, I met my sister at my house. And we started moving my stuff to her house while the divorce goes through, or at least until my soon-to-be ex-wife leaves and I get possession of the house. We took 4 carloads to her house and came back for the rest. My sister felt it was important for her to be there to support me and as a witness. I also moved the nanny cam into the living room so it could record everything in the cloud. At about 10:45 a.m., I got a text from the lawyer saying she had been served. I sent my wife an email saying that I am at the house when she is ready to talk. A couple of minutes later, I got a text from my wife saying, "Why? Blah, blah, blah." So I resent the first text and waited for her to get home. She sent several texts and voicemails. They don't mention anything about cheating, just how she thought we were working this out, and she thought we would sit down and have a conversation before proceeding with a divorce. Playing the family card and how this will devastate the child in our families, she even said she feels betrayed. That was a good one. She was still sharing her location, and it took her 20 minutes before she left work. She then stopped at a nearby Walgreens for a few minutes. The purpose of the stop at Walgreens became clear as a police car pulled in behind her in the driveway. According to the officers, she got the police there because she said she was afraid and that we had guns in the house. I showed the officers my empty gun safe and said that I had removed them to another secure location. We went back to the living room and I showed my wife the paternity test that I had done, which showed her daughter was not mine. Her response was denial and disbelief, which appeared genuine. She broke down and cried for about 10 minutes. I told her this was the final straw and why I wanted the divorce. At about that time, the police officers reminded me to keep it civil and made their exit after I told them I was leaving soon to stay at my sister's house. When I asked who the child's father was, she claimed she didn't know. I asked if there were that many guys she was sleeping with or if she just didn't know his name. I asked how many times she had cheated on me between pregnancies, to which she said it was just the two of them. I told her that I had said earlier if she didn't tell the whole truth, that I was done. I reminded her I also told her that I couldn't and wouldn't raise someone else's child, and that she had better figure out who the real father was because I wasn't paying child support for someone else's baby. She wanted to know what we were going to tell our daughter, and I said that was up to her because this was her mess and I wasn't taking the blame or cleaning it up for her. I drafted a couple of emails last week, one for our friends and family with copies of all the test results and reasons why I was asking for a divorce, and the other for my wife with copies of the same tests, along with what I knew and things that I had told her previously. I had to run it through my lawyer and make a couple of edits before she signed off on it. I sent copies to all our friends and relatives when she pulled into the driveway this afternoon. Most of the feedback had been one-sided and very colorful. In the end, I told her if she had been truthful, we might have been able to work things out. But I couldn't trust a lying serial cheater. And I told her if she had gotten her tubes tied instead of me getting a vasectomy, she might have gotten away with it. I told her she needed to get a lawyer so we could move forward and start to heal. Update: we had our second meeting with the lawyers today, and we signed off on almost everything except the house. Still waiting for an appraisal to come back and figure out the split. Motions got filed today, and a court-ordered paternity test was scheduled for all three of us. Since my soon-to-be ex-wife didn't fight me on everything, we filed the no-fault divorce petition. If everything goes right, I get the house back on February 15th, and the divorce will be final on April 5th. The lawyers did a better job of keeping us separated and keeping the conversation between the two of us to a minimum. I was a little worried when she came in pale and with no energy to speak of. I couldn't tell if it was a lack of sleep or maybe over-medication. She just stared out the window as the lawyers read everything to us before we signed some of the papers. Walking out felt like I had shed a giant weight from around my neck. HR got me signed up for therapy tomorrow. My boss had put a bottle of champagne on my desk and offered me some time off if I needed it, but I told him I was excited to get back to work. More community thoughts. First up, I understand your need to end the marriage and disassociate yourself from the child. Just get ready for people to come down hard on you because you're leaving the kid. I get it, but it isn't their business. If you're sure you can't be a good father to the child, then you leaving is the best choice. I'm sorry for the child, but her cheating mother is to blame, not you. Good luck. OP replies, I could never be the kind of father she needs. She's a carbon copy of my ex-wife, and every time I look at her, it reminds me of her mother and what she did to me. I'll miss her, but this is something I don't think I'll get over. Plus, I would have to see my ex, and that won't be a good thing either. Next person says, thank you. Thank you for respecting yourself. Your ex-wife is one of the worst human beings, making you believe you're the father and then just taking it away that easily. Don't believe anything she says. She was ready to let you raise someone else's children forever. You handled it perfectly. Go full no contact, and don't be a nice guy. She did 2 of the worst betrayals to you. Good thing you handled family and friends. Every step you took is what I advise everyone else in this sub to do. Good luck. OP replies, don't believe anything she says? She was ready to let you raise someone else's children forever. Her reaction to the paternity test seemed credible. I think it's just possible she didn't think the child wasn't mine. The DNA wasn't even close to a match, so it was pretty clear I'm not the father. But yeah, everything else she says is probably a lie. Man, OP, what a wild ride you've been on. It's like you're living out an episode of Jerry Springer, but with fewer fistfights and more paperwork. Your sister's there for moral support and, let's face it, to witness the chaos. Good call on the nanny cam. Might as well turn your living room into a reality TV set, right? Your soon-to-be ex gets served, and predictably, she goes full drama queen, sending you a barrage of texts about betrayal and family devastation. She even brings the cops into it because, of course, she's suddenly scared of you and your non-existent arsenal. Classic move, really. Nothing says, I'm the victim, like dragging the police into a domestic squabble. Then, the piece de resistance, you drop the paternity test bombshell and she does the Oscar-worthy performance of denial and disbelief. She even cries for 10 minutes straight. Did she practice that in front of a mirror? When you ask who the father is, she claims she doesn't know. Either she's been busier than a bee in spring, or her memory is as selective as her morals. The emails you drafted, chef's kiss, sending out copies of the test results to friends and family is a power move. Bet their group chats are lit right now. And the fact that your lawyer signed off on it, that's just icing on the divorce cake. As for the kid, it's rough, but it sounds like you're making the best decision for your sanity. Anyone judging you can take a hike. They aren't living your life or dealing with your ex's web of lies. So, here's to a fresh start and a drama-free future. Cheers! What would you have done? Would you have stuck around for the kid? Would you have wanted to be in the child's life? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining us today.
I thought I'd arrive early at the lawyer's office, but when my lawyer and I got there, Dave and his lawyer were already in the conference room. Seeing him with an attractive woman triggered my usual jealous reaction, making me feel somewhat inferior to him deep down. At 48, he was more handsome than at 20, tall and muscular, owning a successful business and leading the local chamber of commerce. I shuddered at the thought that if today didn't go well, I might never feel his comforting arms again. Dave barely acknowledged me as I followed my lawyer into the room. My face turned pale when the red-haired lawyer reached out to reassure him. I interpreted it as her wanting to quickly finish the meeting to pursue him. I knew from experience that she would enjoy it, as my husband was skilled and knew how to use his charm. Dave smiled at her but remained neutral when he looked at me. Frustrated by Dave's determination not to talk to me, I was forced to attend the meeting. While my lawyer chatted with the red-haired lawyer, I sat down. Dave took a folder from my large purse, opened it, and laid out the finished 2-page script. Seeing Dave smile faintly, I knew he was aware of my thorough preparation. He set up a laptop, plugged in speakers, and put a single sheet of paper next to it. Then, casually, he put his hands on the table and looked at me with a polite but insensitive face. No anger, no hate, no grief. I had prepared for this meeting for 3 days, knowing my script by heart. I used my knowledge of David Brown to appeal to his emotions. We gathered to discuss Mrs. Julianne Brown agreeing to sign a divorce petition if Dave listened to her for at least 1 hour. "If everyone is ready, I suggest the hour begins now," she said, turning the timer knob. It began to tick loudly, emphasizing the silence in the room. I was annoyed that Dave insisted on having lawyers present instead of a private meeting. I planned to share my feelings for the next 45 minutes before making Dave admit to something justifying my inappropriate behavior. It's awkward with just the two of us, even more humiliating in front of strangers. Well, no point in dwelling on the negatives. I had no choice. Glancing at my unnecessary notes, I crossed my fingers. Remembering my friend Sonia's advice, I cleared my throat. I expressed gratitude for Dave's willingness to meet with me today. I acknowledged my error and clarified that it wasn't related to his failure, but rather my own self-centeredness. I had spent days reflecting on this, hoping that Dave would appreciate my honesty. I believed he desired to forgive me, and my speech aimed to offer the justification he needed. Contemplating what might happen if the kids were at home, I considered playing the "Dave, you can't break up the family" card, confident it would succeed. Observing his reaction to my speech, I examined his face and was taken aback by his response. In the ensuing silence, Dave's expression remained neutral. He didn't even direct his gaze toward me. Methodically, he raised his pen and marked a check next to the first sentence in his notes. My first words almost completely confused me. I said exactly what he expected, shaking my confidence. In my arrogance, I forgot that not only had I come up with my argument based on 30 years of knowing him, but he had spent those 30 years looking back at me. I'm not ashamed to admit I was shocked. I emphasized the importance of sticking to the script, reiterating that the situation with Dave was a result of my own foolish and self-centered decisions. I conveyed the feelings of being lost, without children, feeling aged, unattractive, and worthless. I explained that I met Jason while collaborating on a church committee, describing him as sophisticated and a skilled seducer who knew precisely which buttons to press and when. He began acting like a friend, listening to my problems after church meetings last year when you were frequently away. But one day, after a church meeting, Jason suggested going to a cafe, and unfortunately, I agreed. It all seemed innocent, and he appeared as a good friend, so I didn't realize he was adept at breaking through a woman's defenses. Well, from coffee shops, we progressed to restaurants where he complained about his wife. I know it's a cliché, but by then, I trusted him. The restaurants became increasingly upscale, and the gifts he gave me became more enjoyable. Oh, Dave, you can't imagine how nice it is when a guy 15 years younger than you tries to win you over. But you'd be proud because 4 months ago, He asked me to sleep with him, and I declined. I should have refused to meet him after that when his intentions were clear, but by then, I had become somewhat reliant on the effect his compliments and attention had on my ego and confidence. I fell silent and sniffled, wiping my eyes with the finger I had previously rubbed on an onion piece in my pocket. It stung so much that I didn't dare rub my other eye. One teary eye should have been enough. I stopped, started again, faltered, and hesitated. Oh, honey, I'm so ashamed that I didn't break up with him. He took me to a restaurant and bought a $300 bottle of Grange, even though he himself doesn't drink wine. Instead of wasting it, I drank almost all of it. I'm pretty sure that's what he wanted. I was too nervous to resist him. When we left the restaurant, he offered to take me home, and I foolishly agreed. Once in the driveway, he leaned over and kissed me, but I was too drunk to stop him. You know how I get after a couple of glasses of wine. Then he started touching my chest. At this point, my logic was completely broken, and I remember just thinking that I should move him out of the driveway so the neighbors wouldn't see us. For the same reason, I opened the garage door and forced him to park inside. I cheated a little by admitting that even in the car, I thought Jason might be staying a while. And I certainly didn't want the neighbors to see a strange car in the driveway the next morning. But it was all a calculated risk on my part. I knew enough about men in general to understand that being betrayed was a major blow to a man's ego, and I wanted Dave to ensure that no one else ever found out about it. Well, except for 2 lawyers. Well, Jason got out of the car as the garage door was closing and started kissing me again. As I said, I had already drunk most of the bottle of Grange and was ripe for plucking. He grabbed my key and led me inside. I took him to one of the spare bedrooms, and I will be ashamed of this until the day I die. I let him do whatever he wanted with me. I'm so sorry, Dave. My only saving grace was that I was composed enough with him to get him to put on a safe. After Jason came, I think we both fell asleep. I because I was drunk, and he because he must have been tired after a 4 or 5 month chase. I know for sure I wouldn't have done it if I wasn't drunk and depressed when I woke up, and I definitely would have kicked him to the curb immediately. Instead, you entered the room and turned on the light. I have never been so ashamed in my life. The look of pain on your face just killed me. I realized how much misuse I caused to you and us with one simple mistake. With tears still flowing from one eye, I turned my pleading gaze to my husband. Having spent a lifetime together, I knew that I could read his expression like an open book and be able to judge how my request was going. Not true. His expression remained neutral. In fact, he didn't even look at me. Strange, but he was fiddling with the laptop in front of him. I thought he was writing notes until he clicked the link on his screen. A voice came from the speakers. My voice. Ugh, don't kiss me. You reek of beer. What about you, rotten grape breath? What? I had one lousy glass of white. The audio clip stopped and the room fell into a thunderous silence. I think that's how it was. The roaring sound in my head drowned out everything else. Yes, I felt embarrassed and humiliated when Dave walked in on me that night with Jason before lifting Jason by his hair and beating the crap out of his body. But that was insignificant compared to the fact that I had just been caught in a huge lie. This completely threw me off track. I was so confident that my script would work, my eyes darted around the room. Dave's lawyer smiled slightly. Mine looked slightly embarrassed. Dave just looked at me expectantly with that damn blank expression. Later. I will never understand why I didn't immediately realize what it all meant. What the heck? Dave had an audio recording of my meeting with Jason that night being wound up. It never occurred to me to follow the logic of this. Why does he need a voice recorder there if he didn't know in advance that he could record something? What else did we say? The silence stretched uncomfortably for a long time, and I looked at the cryptic shorthand of my notes and, looking back stupidly, plunged into the script I had prepared. I clung to him like a drowning man clings to debris. It was only once. It won't happen again. Nothing like that. Please believe me. I just wasn't strong enough to resist him, but I wasn't so out of control that I wouldn't force him to use a protection or let him take me on our bed. He wanted it, but I would never do that, no matter how drunk I was. We were in Megan's old room, right? Dave just looked at me sadly, and I didn't know what was worse, his sad face or his impassive one. He shook his head and turned to the computer. I felt, rather than heard him double-click the icon, and I cringed until I just like to watch how you lie in front of me, full of desire. It is very hot. Then, once it's finished, another double-click, and Jason's voice again. "When can we have time in bed again in your clueless husband's bed?" It was so cool. This time, Dave clicked and ended the clip, and then just looked at me silently, accusatory. What could I even say? Everything I claimed was debunked, not by Dave, but by my own words. Protection. It was a one-time drunken mistake, not getting closeness with my husband in our own bed. The whole thing crumbled as a lie in just 30 words. Stand, stand. I'm speechless. Though it was awkward, I looked at Dave for any clue. His neutral gaze revealed nothing. I noticed my lawyer checking her watch, making me focus on the ticking timer, realizing the 60 minutes I had to salvage my marriage were slipping away, and I admit, going terribly. I forced myself to suppress panic. Apologies for the lie, Dave, about it being the first time. I just didn't want to hurt you more than I already had. I thought if I could convince you it was a one-time thing, and for the exact reason I stated, you wouldn't be so offended. I stumbled back into silence. Should I now admit I dated Jason several times a week for over 6 months? The trouble was, I didn't know what Dave knew. He had recorded conversations, revealing the night he found us wasn't the first or only night. But what else did he know? Hiding the recorder where I usually did with Jason hinted at suspicion at least one more time. I just didn't know. However, I knew that if I was caught telling one more lie, it would all be over. Well, Juliana, it's time to be vague, avoid details, and stick to the facts. The truth is that Jason did seduce me, and it took a while. He has a thing for older women. It's true that being pursued by a man almost my kid's age gave me an ego boost. I admit it, I was weak. I thought about saying I used the master bed only once the first time. It would be a lie, but put me in a better light. But not knowing how long Dave knew about my extramarital activities held me back. I decided to stay silent on this. However, I couldn't remain silent on everything, realizing I had limited time to rectify the situation. Unsure of the best course of action, I turned my attention to my notes. I discarded the initial points after being exposed and focused on words highlighted in capital letters. I conveyed that I never ceased to love and respect Dave, emphasizing that I gave him no less love than I always had. I explained that Jason was an additional dimension that didn't diminish anything from my love for Dave, but rather added an overflowing quality, if I could describe it that way. When I fell silent, Dave redirected his gaze to his laptop screen, furrowed his brow, and appeared momentarily confused. However, he eventually relaxed again. Listening to the recording, a continuation of the earlier soundtrack, I understood that Dave's frown indicated he was searching for an icon on the screen before realizing it was one of the open files. It would be better if he didn't grasp it, and he evidently started over. Going back to the beginning of the video, I revisited Jason's question about being closeness in our marital bed. Like the first time, I cringed, knowing my words once again condemned me with, "I already told you, never again, not after the last time." That night, Dave stepped out of the shower and inadvertently stepped on a large drop of white, for which I was grateful. Dave accepted my explanation about sneezing, attributing the drop to snot. Sinking lower into the seat, I anticipated the predictable words that would follow. Although I initially felt smug when I uttered them, that feeling dissipated. Distracting Dave by offering to clean his leg and doing it nicely diverted his attention. Commenting, "You have to admit, doll, that your husband sometimes acts like an ignorant idiot," I found discussing how we successfully evaded detection, such as when he had to hide in the closet when Dave came home early, insulting. Yes, Dave is clueless. Initially, I found it sweet that he trusted me so much. Now, he's just an ignorant fool. Sometimes, I wonder if we could have time in bed right here while he's in the room. The mocking tone made me realize I was rehashing a futile point. With these words and such a tone, I couldn't even convince myself I loved and respected my husband, let alone him. Again, confusion set in. Before this meeting, I convinced myself I loved and respected Dave. But after what I did and said, how is that possible? Steeped in the ticking, tense silence. After the final nail in my coffin, Dave turned to look at me. I couldn't look him in the face, so I turned to his lawyer. Such contempt on her face made me shudder. Any doubts that Dave was just another client to her vanished. I looked away from her and now looked at my lawyer. She, too, wasn't quick enough to hide her disdain. Here I am, fighting for my future, surrounded by people who think I'm something they stepped into at the dog park, and one of them should be on my side. My confidence dissipated like dew in the midday sun, and my self-esteem quickly followed suit. Perhaps that's why I revisited my notes and chose to adopt an offensive stance. I conveyed to Dave that over the last 6 months, he had been paying me decreasing attention, taking me for granted, traveling for business more frequently, and seemingly distancing himself from me. All of this occurred simultaneously with the children leaving home, leaving me feeling lost. I expressed how he was never there when I needed him, failing to reassure me about my age and attractiveness or provide comfort in times of need. Pausing, I noticed Dave's eyes returning to his screen, and I cringed as his fingers danced, opening the selected file. It became apparent that Jason's words were from just after our second encounter, that fateful night shortly before Dave reached a breaking point. Jason spoke about our recent lack of bed life, expressing his desire for more frequent encounters. He mentioned a canceled trip and how I had requested him to limit Dave's diet. Jason explained that he only had the opportunity that night due to an urgent meeting Dave had to attend. He also expressed a wish for Dave to leave town more often. "Well, I want more," retorted an irritated Jason, to which the clip was once again interrupted. Ashamed, I lowered my eyes to the table, avoiding 3 judgmental glances, and recalled my emotional state during the last conversation. The truth was that the novelty of having a lover, even one as young and energetic as Jason, was beginning to wear on Jason, and my actions in betraying my husband had caused me to lose respect for Dave, and it was at least beginning to prick my conscience. Loss of respect more than anything else, I think, was the reason for my emotional distance from my husband. Even as I prepared for this meeting, fully intending to blame him for pulling away from me, I realized that it was a lie to allow myself to continue to betray him. I emotionally divorced Dave. Cutting him off in bed was an easy decision, simply because Dave's lovemaking was so different from Jason's impatience that it was impossible to confuse the two. This reinforced to me that what I was doing was very, very wrong. So I began to reject my husband's advances. Well, he pressed for a while, then he stopped. I suddenly realized that it should have been screaming for my attention months ago. Dave suddenly gave up his bed life around the same time he began working longer hours and going away more often. At the time, I thought he was also emotionally distancing himself from me. I closed my eyes, now completely confused about who was distancing himself from who. And then, something clicked. Dave must have known for a long time. That's why he knew he had to hide the recorder in Megan's room. Crap. My entire approach to this meeting was to minimize my crime, heal Dave's wounded pride, eat some humble thing, all to get my life back and the future I so desperately wanted. I thought I was calming a recently wounded bull. But if I was right about him knowing at least 2 weeks before he discovered Nate confronted me, then he was a lot more cunning than I thought, and I was wasting my time calling to his emotions. Stand. In short, I had no idea what to do. I'm much better when I plan than when I'm spontaneous. Hence, 2 pages of notes. But I had to do something. Time was running out. The ticking of the clock confirmed this. In desperation, I took my notes and began to look for hope. The pounding in my head made absorbing the words a very slow process. Nothing jumped out. Then I realized that the recordings were a red herring because the game had changed so much. If Dave knew I was leaving for a while, what was his state of mind? He, of course, was offended by my betrayal. But most of all, he was worried about my motivation. Wasn't I satisfied with the quantity and quality of his lovemaking? Do I find him boring and want to explore my kinky side? Did I love Jason? Was I really going to run away with him? I could correct these fears and doubts. I risked looking into those expressionless eyes, wondering if I should risk lying again. If only I could remember what else Jason and I talked about that fateful night. If only I could be sure that this was the only night David recorded. Of course, the sequence had to be suspect. Install recorders. Resist. He could not be sure of this for long. He just wasn't a good actor. I desperately wanted to convince him of the truth. I still loved and respected him. My desperate desire that he would not abandon me proved this. It was far beyond my fear of losing my very comfortable lifestyle. But how do I convince him that I respect him after we've all heard me call him and goofy in front of my lover? What's the point of trying to justify denigrating him to my lover as a soppy to my conscience and creating a common bond between Jason and me? Nothing that I could see. The same applied to love for him. If I had caught him deceiving me, the wild horses would not have been able to draw the conclusion out of me that he still loved me. So convincing him that I love and respect him will take time. I won time by convincing him not to insist that I immediately sign the divorce papers. But how long does that damn timer keep ticking to convince him of this? One thing was for sure, my next few sentences were going to score points. Lots of points. Summoning my courage, I directed my gaze across the table at Dave. I conveyed to him that I understood he perceived a loss of my love and respect, reassuring him that it was not the case. I affirmed my love for him and our life together, expressing a sincere desire to spend the remainder of my days solely with him. I acknowledged the gravity of my actions, admitting that Jason was a distraction and that I didn't love him. Furthermore, I assured Dave that running away with Jason was never my intention. I admitted the wrongdoing of my actions, particularly in response to Jason's proposal to limit our closeness. Reflecting on the situation, I confessed that I didn't know why I went through with it, especially after convincing myself that I was merely providing Jason with an excess that Dave couldn't handle. I highlighted that Jason lacked the stamina and experience that Dave possessed, and my actions were driven solely by lust and selfishness. Although the physical aspect brought a temporary satisfaction, it was devoid of any genuine emotion. I clarified that I didn't engage in the same perversions with Jason that I had denied Dave throughout the years. Time seemed to slow down, mirroring the pace of those on the verge of pass away. The disintegration of my marriage unfolded in slow motion, with everyone around me moving at a normal speed. To my left, my lawyer expressed her disdain, tossing her pen on the table and turning to me. It was evident that, in this moment, I couldn't even pay someone to be on my side. Dave's lawyer leaned to the side to gain a better view of the laptop screen, revealing that Dave was not playing sound files, as I had assumed, but rather video clips. This realization intensified the gravity of the situation. Dave's wife grabbed his hand in a show of support, and though he wasn't looking at me, his reaction conveyed a profound hurt, as if the man meant to support him had betrayed him. I witnessed a fleeting expression of devastation on his face, and a single tear rolled down from the eye closest to me. I questioned whether he was truly suffering, or if he had steeled himself by fixating on the screen. Amidst the chaos, a few irrelevant facts registered in my mind. The recording was made at least 3 weeks before the collision, meaning Dave had been witnessing my betrayal for some time, enough to discern a pattern. Silence enveloped us as the speakers played, the heat that had once suffused the room now transforming into a sense of dirtiness, sloppiness, and tastelessness. I focused on the table, and my lawyer laid out the divorce papers before me. Helpless, I couldn't counter the vile behavior that Dave had uncovered. With unparalleled ease, he dismantled all my rationalizations, minimizations, and feeble attempts at reconciliation. It was over. Dave, acting as an orchestra conductor, didn't utter a word today. Instead, he indicated the section of the orchestra he wanted to play next, using his skills and talents to execute a silent symphony of separation. No, it wasn't Dave. I ascended the scaffold myself, blindfolded and with a noose in hand, kicking the lever. Dave simply erected the scaffold and departed. As soon as he played the last clip, he knew precisely what I was going to say, leaving me with no chance at redemption. And when I came up with my arguments based on my closeness knowledge of him, after observing him for 3 decades, I had forgotten that he also looked at me for the same amount of time. Looking back at me with her smart, penetrating eyes. The shame and humiliation were unbearable, and finally caused me to run away. Escape was what I needed. Running back to the house that was still my home, at least until Dave got the eviction notice. That was part of the agreement. An escape to children who I hope will never know and will continue to love me unconditionally. The only way to salvation lay through a receipt with the loss of most of my life. I took the pen, signed the 2 agreements, and threw it away in one fluid motion. I was surprised Dave's business wasn't worth more. But that's what my lawyer's assessment found. And of course, Dave had plenty of time to hide most of it. By that time, the last recording had thankfully ended, and the ticking silence returned. My lawyer took the signed papers, handing me a copy while placing the rest in her briefcase. She left the room, leaving me seated, frozen, torn between the desire to run and the wish to convey a positive message. I longed for an ember of hope, something to convince myself that there might be a chance to rekindle the flame someday, to let Dave know that I still cared about his well-being. The sharp sound of an alarm clock disrupted my thoughts, prompting me to stand up and deliver my positive phrase. The jackal, holding Dave's hand with both hands, urged him not to seek revenge on Jason, expressing her fear of never forgiving herself if he ended up in prison. Dave's response was another damning video, thankfully not featuring my voice, but that of another woman speaking in an almost shrill tone. She mentioned the consequences Jason would face if her brothers got to him first, identifying herself as Mrs. Jason. Initially, I had thought Jason's silence after the beating reflected fear on his part, but now I pondered that being divorced and penniless might be a fitting end for the scammer. The burden on my conscience grew heavier as I considered that he might die because he had been involved with me. As I prepared to leave, I couldn't bring myself to look Dave in the face. Whether he had his expressionless face, whether he was laughing or crying, it all pained me, a constant reminder of the misuse I had caused this good man. He had lost everything except my house and money, and suffered a tremendous emotional blow, all at my hands. I deserved every bit of his anger. Through tears, I managed to squeeze out a feeble, "Goodbye, dear," as I shuffled towards the door. My pathetic attempt to salvage my old life was discarded, akin to a plague beetle. Perhaps my daughter Megan would visit me while I drowned myself in oblivion, or if she wasn't available, then my son Joel. Just as I began to push the door, voices behind me caught my attention. Another damn recording. An excited young male voice accused, "Cheater!" A very familiar female voice intervened, asking, "Are you sure, Dad? I think I'll drink alone today."
I've always had a talent for sabotaging myself. From middle school through the start of college, I became my own worst obstacle when it came to relationships, especially with girls I admired from a distance. Despite several attempts to get closer, something always blocked my efforts. Usually it was me. Whether I said the wrong thing at the wrong time or hesitated when boldness was needed, my doubts constantly held me back. In high school, I developed an intense attraction to one girl in particular. It wasn't just a fleeting crush. It felt like a gravitational force. No matter how hard I tried to move on, she was always on my mind. Over time, I found myself torn between trying too hard to get noticed and convincing myself it was better to stay invisible. Little did I know my awkwardness would follow me into college, and that same girl would still be on my mind. Her name was Rebecca Ann Courtney. I'd admired her from afar since 7th grade, but no matter how much I fantasized about being with her, I knew deep down it wasn't meant to be. The truth was, Rebecca couldn't stand me. She tolerated my presence only because we shared mutual friends, but I never understood why she disliked me. At first, I thought she just didn't know me well enough, so I tried to fix that. Whenever I saw her, I'd say hi, but though she'd acknowledge me, she'd turn away or just walk off. Throughout 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th grades, I must have asked her out 50 times, but she never gave me the time of day. In 12th grade, she started dating Frank Devon, so I stopped asking her out. I wasn't expecting to see Becky after graduation, so it surprised me when I saw her on her first day of college. I'd heard she was going to a school out east. By then, I'd gotten over my feelings for Becky, so I didn't bother saying hi when I saw her. Fate, or the gods, must have enjoyed messing with me because Becky was always around. It turned out we both chose to major in business management, so we shared a lot of classes. Did I still have feelings for Rebecca Ann? I often asked myself. And the answer was, of course, yes. But I had learned from past mistakes, so I did my best to ignore her. It wasn't easy, and sometimes it was incredibly tough. It seemed like every 4th class had group projects, and the instructors usually assigned groups alphabetically. Since Courtney and Connors were close in the alphabet, we often ended up in the same group. Fortunately, when it came time to divide tasks for the project, I didn't have to work directly with Becky. I wasn't sure I could handle it. One thing I noticed, though, was that whenever our groups met to work, Becky always seemed to look at me when I looked at her. I didn't know what that meant, but I chose not to dwell on it. I made it through my first year without embarrassing myself and looked forward to summer break. Did I mention fate and the gods like to mock me? My family owns a business, and I've worked there part-time since I was 13. Summer is our busiest time, and Dad always hires extra help for the season. A week after school ended, I arrived at work, and Dad called me into his office. When I walked in, Rebecca Courtney was sitting there. As soon as I entered, Dad said, "Good news and bad news, Harry. The bad news, Charlie had a family emergency and had to fly home to Maine. He expects to be gone for a month or two. The good news, instead of working for Charlie this summer, you'll be the temporary shipping and receiving manager. Shouldn't be a problem. You've worked here full-time for 2 of the last 3 years and part-time since you were 14. He nodded toward Becky and added, "I need to introduce you to Rebecca. I hired her to take your place while you play the role of manager." "I already know Miss Courtney," I said, surprising Dad. He raised an eyebrow, not because I knew Becky, but because I called her Miss Courtney instead of Rebecca, or Becky. He didn't say anything about it then, but I knew he'd want to know what that was about before the day ended. "All right," Dad said. "Show Rebecca around, make sure she knows where everything is, and then get to work." I spent about 20 minutes giving Becky a tour of the production facilities. I showed her both women's restrooms, the lounge, and where the snack machines were located. I introduced her to Marla and Ashley from purchasing, Janice from accounting, and Alice from quality control. Then I took her to the shipping and receiving department and introduced her to Tom and Jerry, who work there as well. I explained what we did and what her responsibilities would be. When I finished, I asked, "Do you have any questions?" Instead of asking about the job, she looked at me and said, "Why don't you love me?" Her question completely caught me off guard. It took me a moment to gather myself before responding. I recalled something one of my English teachers had said. When something isn't clear, ask questions. "Why do you think I don't love you?" I asked. "You know me, and you know I prefer to call you Becky. So, what's with this Miss Courtney stuff? And why have you been cold and distant toward me in classes?" I chose the easy way out. "This is a personal matter, Miss Courtney, and it doesn't belong at work. Maybe one day when we're not at work, we can talk about it. But for now, we need to focus on the Hamilton order and be ready when UPS arrives around 1 o'clock. Her expression told me she wasn't finished with the conversation, but work took priority for the moment. As Jerry showed her how everything worked, I couldn't stop wondering what had just happened. After 6 years of her ignoring me, she suddenly wanted to know why I didn't love her? It didn't add up. She had spent years pushing me away, and now she wanted to know why I wasn't chasing her? I brushed those thoughts aside and got back to work. After lunch, I went to the purchasing department to ask Ashley about the packaging materials we were waiting for. She said they'd arrive the next day, then asked with a smirk, "How did you manage to get your girlfriend a job here?" "She's not my girlfriend," I replied. "And I didn't even know she was working here until this morning." Ashley grinned. "She's not your girlfriend? Come on, Harry, she sure wants to be." I laughed it off and went back to shipping and receiving. The next 2 days passed with minimal interaction between Becky and me. On the third day, I was having lunch at the diner near work, when Becky walked in, spotted me, and sat down across from me. "We're not at work, Harold, and we're off the clock. So, tell me, what's with the Miss Courtney thing, and why don't you love me?" I sighed and turned the question back on her. "Why do you expect me to love you? Given how you've treated me since 7th grade, why would I? You've rejected my invitations more than once. You mentioned coldness the other day, remember? Miss Courtney, haven't you been cold and distant toward me for all those years? Why, after treating me like that, would you expect me to be warm and friendly? I don't hate you, but I've become indifferent because of how things were." Her expression changed. She wasn't used to being spoken to like that, and it clearly didn't sit well with her. But she had asked, and I had answered. She looked at me with an unreadable expression, then stood up and left without saying a word. The rest of the week went by quietly. Although we worked close to each other, we rarely spoke, limiting our conversations to work-related topics. On Saturday afternoon, I went to the country club where my family has a membership. Becky's family also had memberships there, and I'd seen her around over the years. As luck would have it, she was there with 2 friends from high school. I have to admit, seeing the 3 of them in swimsuits made quite an impression. At one point, I noticed them glancing in my direction while Becky said something to them. They smiled and nodded, and I couldn't help but wonder what they were talking about. I had no intention of asking. The club's cafeteria serves a fantastic half-pound burger, so I stopped to order one. While waiting, Sarah Wilcox and Carol Perry came in, saw me, and sat down without asking. These were the same girls Becky had been talking to earlier by the pool. "What's new, Harry? How's it going? Long time no see," Carol chimed in. I immediately sensed something wasn't right. I had known both Carol and Sarah since 3rd grade, but we were never the type to strike up casual conversations like this. The fact that they had just been talking with Becky only heightened my suspicion. "Warning, Harry," I thought. "Danger ahead. I've been busy with classes, and now that it's summer, my dad has me working full-time," I replied. "Are you and Polina still together? I haven't heard from her since she went east for school, Sarah asked. Then, out of nowhere, she asked, "Are you free tonight?" "Nothing planned, why?" I answered cautiously. "There's a party I want to go to, but I need a date. If I go alone, I'll get hassled all night." I could feel the alarms ringing in my head. "Warning, Harry, this feels like trouble." But my curiosity got the better of me. "I think I'd like that," I agreed. Sarah shot a grin at Carol. "Looks like someone missed their chance." "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked. "Carol was going to invite you, but I beat her to it." That's when it clicked. This was a setup. Carol, who I knew wasn't into guys, wouldn't have been inviting me to anything. We agreed on a time for me to pick up Sarah, and just as my burger arrived, the two of them left. As I sat there eating, I kept trying to figure out what was going on. No matter how much I thought about it, I couldn't make sense of it. I picked Sarah up at 7, and she told me the party was at Marlene Cantrell's place. Marlene was another girl I knew from school. We had dated a few times, but it didn't work out. We stayed friends, though we weren't particularly close. When we arrived, Marlene opened the door smiling, though I could tell she was surprised to see me with Sarah. She welcomed us and showed us to the terrace where there were drinks, alcoholic and non-alcoholic punch, and a keg of beer. Sarah and I mingled and danced for a while. About half an hour into the party, I saw Becky walking out of the house with Marlene. Becky noticed us, said something to Marlene, and then made a beeline for Sarah and me. She tapped Sarah on the shoulder. "Mind if I cut in?" Becky asked sweetly. "Sure," Sarah said, stepping aside. Becky moved in, smiling. "Hello, Harry," she said, her tone playful. "Hello, Becky," I replied, though my mind was racing. "What's going on?" I asked, surprising her. "Going on with what?" she asked, frowning. "Why did you get Sarah to bring me here?" Becky's demeanor shifted immediately from casual to serious. "I didn't think we were that obvious," she admitted, her voice calm but direct. "I needed to talk to you somewhere private. I figured if I asked you directly, you wouldn't agree. But if I got you here casually, you'd be more open to it." "Well, you've definitely gotten my attention," I said. "Let's sit down and I'll explain," she suggested. We left the dance floor and she led me to a couple of chairs on the grass after pouring herself a drink from the alcoholic punch bowl. Once we sat down, she didn't waste any time. "After our talk last week about why you don't love me, I started reflecting on our past. I never really considered how my behavior might have looked from your perspective. Honestly, Harry, you scared me," she confessed. "Scared you? How did I scare you?" I asked, genuinely confused. She sighed. "It was the way you looked at me, always being around. Looking back, I thought it was more like stalking than just a crush." "A stalker?" I was completely caught off guard. "Let me explain," she continued. "You didn't know my sister, Abby. She's 6 years older than me and went to state to study IT. There was a guy who kept asking her out, but she wasn't interested. He acted just like you did, constantly watching her, always nearby. Eventually, he attacked her at a party. Luckily, some people heard her yelling and stopped him before it got worse. After that, every time I saw you, I thought of him and what happened to Abby." I sat there stunned. "Becky, if you had let me, I would have shown you I'm nothing like that," I said softly. "I know that now," she sighed. "When you first asked me out, I was into Danny Freeman and trying to get his attention. I turned you down because I didn't want to risk losing him. By the time I realized Danny wasn't interested, Abby's experience was all I could think about. So yes, I acted cold and rude towards you because I thought you were a stalker." Becky paused and sipped her drink. "Looking back, I realized I was wrong. But by the time I figured that out, you were already with Polina, and I thought it was too late to say anything. So I just let it go." I leaned back, trying to process everything she had said. "Well," I finally replied, "I'm glad you don't think I'm some kind of creep anymore. And since you've explained all this, maybe I'll stop calling you Miss Courtney and go back to calling you Becky, if you're okay with that." She smiled softly, but didn't respond immediately. She just stared at me, as if trying to read my mind. After a moment, I stood up. "Anyway," I said, "I need to find Sarah and make sure she's enjoying herself." I walked away, leaving Becky sitting there, clearly shocked by my reaction. I wasn't sure what she expected after telling me all that, but indifference probably wasn't it. I found Sarah chatting with Randy Combs and Rick Moore. She gave me a questioning look while Randy and Rick glared at me as if to say, "Go away." Ignoring them, I extended my hand to Sarah. "Our dance got interrupted," I said. "Let's finish it." Sarah hesitated, clearly not thrilled, but she couldn't refuse without causing a scene. Forcing a smile, she said, "Okay, let's go." As we danced, I asked, "So, Who was supposed to take you home tonight? Randy, she admitted reluctantly. I nodded. Well, I don't want to ruin your night. After this dance, I'll leave. Why do you want to leave? She asked. The plan was for you to end up with Becky tonight. I smiled. Becky and I just had a 10-minute conversation about 6 years of coldness and neglect. Maybe things will be better at work, but that's all that's changed. The music stopped, and I thanked Sarah for the dance, walking her back to Randy and the group. She grabbed my hand, stopping me. Oh no, she said firmly. You're not leaving. The rule is you dance with the one who brought you, and you leave with the one who brought you. You're stuck with me tonight. I raised an eyebrow. Is that the rule from the girl who already arranged for Randy to take her home? She laughed. Rules have exceptions. She pulled me back onto the dance floor, and as we danced, she asked, Why have we never really hung out before, Harry? That's a question only you can answer, Sarah. I asked you many times, but you always said no. I probably had a good reason back then, but I can't remember it now. I'll have to think about it. My problem is, I think I'd like to make it up to you. But Becky's my friend, and she's trying hard to win you over. I don't want to mess that up. I just don't get why she's interested now. From 7th grade until we graduated, she made it clear she didn't care about me. I don't see what's changed. All I know is, she pushed me to bring you here tonight and told me that if things went her way, she'd leave with you. And that made you curious, and now you're interested. Guilty as charged, I chuckled. Don't worry, Sarah, Harry loves the attention. As we danced, I noticed Becky watching us. I couldn't tell what she was thinking, but it seemed like every time I glanced over, her eyes were on me. Later, I saw her dancing with Bill Croft, but even then, she kept looking my way. As midnight approached and the party wound down, I took Sarah's hand and went to say goodbye to Marlene. Once in the car, I asked Sarah if she wanted to grab coffee or a bite to eat, and she said yes. So we drove over to the diner on 6th Street. Over coffee and pie, I asked, Is our night together going to mess things up with Randy? She shook her head. No, we hang out sometimes, but there's nothing serious between us. We just look out for each other when we need a date for something. And what about Becky? How will this affect your friendship with her? It shouldn't. I don't see why it would. I was your date, and she can't be mad at me just because you didn't follow her plan. That's today. But what about in the future? I don't know if I'll do this, but let me ask. Do you want to go to the VFW dance with me on Friday? She was silent for a few seconds, weighing the consequences of saying yes. Then she agreed. On Sunday, after church, I spent the day doing chores around the house and yard, running errands for my mom. Around 4 o'clock, I was pulling weeds from the flower beds when my mom called out that I had a phone call. It was Sarah. I have to cancel our date on Friday, she said. Just talk to Becky. She wasn't too upset that last night didn't go as planned. But when I told her about Friday, she freaked out. I don't want to lose one of my best friends over something that probably won't go anywhere. I understand, Sarah. Maybe another time, I replied. After I hung up, I couldn't stop thinking about Becky and her actions. Why, after years of neglect, was she suddenly so determined? I could accept her explanation for her past behavior at Marlene's party, but why this sudden intensity? It didn't make sense. All day, thoughts of Becky and her new behavior swirled through my mind, then faded, only to come back again. She was used to guys being interested in her, but I hadn't been chasing her. So, was she trying to recruit me as another fan? Did she see me as a challenge? Or had she finally realized how irresistible I am? Of course, that must be it. On Monday morning, I was at my desk in the shipping department when Becky walked in. I smiled at her and said, Good morning, Becky. How was your weekend? This caught her off guard, given our past, but she quickly regained her composure. It was normal. Not how I wanted it, but normal. That day was busy, and though Becky and I were around each other, we only talked about work. Tuesday and Wednesday went by the same way. But Thursday afternoon, everything changed. It was a slow day, and I was at my desk going through paperwork while Becky was entering data at a side table. Suddenly, she turned to me and asked, Are you doing anything tomorrow night? Her question caught me off guard. I looked at her with a mischievous grin and said, Excuse me, what are you doing tomorrow night? I don't know. Why? Well, I want to go to the VFW dance, and I need a date. Since it looks like you're never going to ask me out, I thought I'd ask you. I'm asking you now, she replied. I was stunned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I sat there, dumbfounded, trying to process what was happening. It's a simple question, Harry, she said. You have two options, yes or no. After shaking off the shock, I finally responded, I don't think that's a good idea, considering our working relationship and all. "Oh, Harry, in just over a month, we'll both be back at school. I'm just a summer assistant. So, how about it, Harry? Yes or no?" I had always liked Becky, right? But by college, I'd accepted that she was out of reach. And here she was, taking the first step. As I sat there, a small war raged in my mind. One side said, "This is too good to be true, Harry." The other side argued, "Come on, this is what you've always wanted." The first side warned, "This will end badly." But the other side whispered, "She clearly wants to get to know you better. What's the harm?" Some other guy might have looked at the years of frustration and said, "No way." But I wasn't that guy. "Yes," I said. "What?" "Yes, I'd like to take you to the VFW dance on Friday." When I picked Becky up on Friday, I was reminded why I'd been so obsessed with her since 7th grade. She looked stunning in her little black dress and heels. I got a great view of her legs as I helped her into the truck. As I got into my seat, Becky said, "I've been thinking about this a lot." "Thinking about what?" I asked. "Why I acted the way I did back then. I guess I'm trying to figure out what I missed by being so awful to you in school." "The truth is you didn't miss much. I was so nervous around you that I could barely think straight. I probably would have done something ridiculous and embarrassed myself." "Were you really that into me?" Past tense. "So I've lost my charm over the years?" she teased. The fact that we're both in this truck right now should answer that. I had a great time at the dance. There were a few familiar faces, including Sarah and Randy. And we ended up pushing some tables together. Becky and I danced well together, moving smoothly across the floor. During a slow song, she leaned in and rested her head on my shoulder, and I couldn't help but curse the gods for not letting this happen sooner. I danced a few times with Sarah and a couple of other girls, but throughout the night, Becky and I kept gravitating back to each other. During a waltz, Sarah said, "Looks like I missed my chance." I laughed. "You had plenty of chances. Every time I asked you out, you turned me down." "That's because I was always dating someone when you asked. You should have kept trying. Eventually, you would have caught me when I wasn't seeing anyone." "Well, crap. If only I'd known." "It's not too late. If things don't work out with Becky, you can always give me a call." "Yeah, and then you'll tell me, 'Sorry, I'm dating someone now.' If that happens, I'd drop him before missing another chance with you." I thought to myself, what's going on with these girls? Suddenly, I was the flavor of the month. "I know what you're thinking, Harry," Sarah said, giving me a knowing look. "Want to bet? You're wondering why girls are suddenly showing interest in you, right?" "Yeah. There are a couple of reasons. First, the girls are talking. Polina gave you high marks, so now that she's out of the picture, others want to see what she found so great. Second, it's simple human nature. Someone else wants it, and suddenly, everyone else does too." The song ended, and Sarah led me back to our table. Her words echoed in my mind about half an hour later while I was dancing with Nancy Wilda. "Are you seeing anyone now that Polina's gone?" she asked. "I've dated a few people, but nothing serious. I know the feeling. Ever since Rory went full-time at Florida State, I've been at a loss, too." I wasn't dumb. I recognized an invitation when I heard one. I started wondering if Sarah was right about everything. Later, on my way back from the bathroom, Rita Dutchman stopped me. "Hey, Harry, I haven't seen you in ages. I've been busy with school and work. How about you?" "Same here. I heard you haven't dated anyone since Polina. You've got my number. Give me a call." She hurried into the women's restroom, and I couldn't help but think back to what Sarah had said. Gail was my first, and for a while I thought I was doing well. Then she told me she had a date with Eddie Catron. I was young and a bit naive back then. After her, I dated a few others with no success until I met Helen Geneva. We dated for a while, but she ended up giving me the same line Gail had. Then came Polina. By that point, I knew that Zex didn't mean a relationship would last. I was aware Polina wouldn't be around long since she was heading back east for college, only coming home during breaks. But then something happened that made me question everything. I had just sat back down after walking Nancy to her seat. I took a sip of my iced tea, no alcohol since I was driving. As I set my glass down, Becky asked, "Am I going to have to fight to leave here with you tonight?" I had no idea what she was talking about, so I just stared at her, confused. "It's obvious that almost every girl you've danced with tonight wants you. I half expected Corin to drag you off the dance floor. Bev looks at you like a cat eyeing a mouse ready to pounce. And even Sarah, who backstabbed me, is giving off I want to take him home vibes. So do I need to fight for the rest of the evening?" I swear, I didn't know where it came from, but I found myself saying, anything worth having is worth fighting for. A strange look crossed her face, and then she said, "That's it, we're leaving." She grabbed her purse, stood up, and pulled me toward the exit, taking my hand in a possessive way. I was caught off guard and reacted slowly, but I followed her. As soon as we got into the car, she kissed me. I'm not easy to get, Harry, but I go after what I want, and right now, I want you. Find us a bed. I was a little dazed by how quickly the night had turned. But dazed or not, there was no way I was going to say no to the girl I'd been obsessed with since 7th grade. It only took me 9 minutes to get to the Bide, a small motel on Colfax, and 4 minutes to check into a room. Once we were inside, Becky looked me in the eyes while undressing and said, "Time for the truth, Harry. I know you're dying to understand why I've changed so suddenly, so here it is. You have what I want. At least I hope you do." I stood there, stunned, while she stood in front of me, gorgeous and without clothes, and I felt like a fool, still fully clothed and just staring. She shook her head, maybe in frustration. I must be losing my touch. Usually by the time I take off my bra, the guy is already undressed and waiting. I guess I'll have to undress you myself. She walked up to me, reaching for the buttons on my shirt. Something in my mind snapped me out of my shock. I grabbed her wrist just as she touched my shirt. "Why?" I asked. "Why what, Harry? Why all this, the hotel room? You didn't have to do that. After tonight's date, I would have asked you out again, and I know you know that. So, why take this big step?" I told you. It's time for the truth, Harry. The simple truth is that unless Polina was lying, you've got what I want. And, after what I saw on the dance floor tonight, it's clear the other girls want it too. I decided I'd better lock you down before someone else does. I still didn't understand the connection with Polina. What could she have said at one of your sleepovers to get you interested in me? Polina told us about your skills. So, I'm just a plaything for the night? And tomorrow you'll go back to ignoring me? She rolled her eyes. Be serious, Harry. If Polina wasn't lying, do you think I'd let you go that easily? And what if you're bad in bed? I have my standards, you know. Her expression turned angry. Bad in bed? I'll show you something, you jerk. And she did. We made love. Not bad. I think you'll do. I was about to say something sarcastic, but paused to consider her words. I think you'll do. Did that mean she was sticking around? If so, I figured I should just keep quiet. I woke up first, sitting up in bed and leaning against the headboard, looking at her and wondering what would come next. When she woke, she rubbed her eyes and looked at me. It's not that bad. What's not? I asked. Whatever's on your mind. It can't be as bad as it looks on your face. How do you know what I'm thinking? It's written all over your face. Let me make it easy for you. No, you don't have to rush me home. Knowing my mom, she's probably not even back yet. I raised an eyebrow, and she noticed. Later, let's cover the next items. No, we're not going to shop for wedding rings today. And no, we're not telling our moms to start planning a wedding. That's all. It didn't end there. She paused, then grinned mischievously. Are we doing this before the shower, in the shower, or after? I vote for all three. She couldn't hold back her laugh, and we moved on from there. We checked out of the motel, tossed the key on the counter, and went to Denny's for breakfast. As we sat down and ordered, Becky brought it up again. I noticed your eyebrow raise when I mentioned my mom and where she probably is. I nodded, waiting for her to continue. My dad died 6 years ago. My mom's a beautiful woman, still healthy and active. She grieved for about a year, then started looking for someone new. She always says no one compares to my dad. I told her she'd never find anyone like him because he was one of a kind and she'd have to settle for second best. She took a sip of her coffee and continued. She's still looking, but let's be real. She's a healthy woman who needs a sex life. She doesn't want to set a bad example for me, so she never brings them home. She thinks I don't know what's going on when she says she stayed over at a friend's house because she drank too much. I listened, taking it all in. Now that we've cleared that up, let's get back to us. Did you enjoy last night? Definitely. Do you want more? Same answer. She looked at me seriously. So much that you'd give up all the other girls? I frowned, but before I could respond, she continued. I'm not talking about getting married. I'm asking if you can be exclusive. I stared at her, unsure of what she meant. I don't get it. Oh, you get it. You're just not ready to admit it yet. Let me spell it out. She leaned in slightly. I went into last night thinking that if Polina wasn't lying, I'd keep you for myself. But if she was, it'd just be a one-night thing. Turns out Polina didn't lie. She couldn't even do you justice. Becky paused, letting me absorb what she was saying, then continued. Last night happened because I saw how the other girls were looking at you. It was obvious to me that a few of them were planning to make a move. I don't share my toys, so... Can you be exclusive with me, or are you going to want to sample everything else? This possibility hadn't crossed my mind when we entered the room the night before. I thought Becky just wanted to satisfy her curiosity and that it would only be a one-night thing. I wasn't going to lie. Sure, I'd love to be like a kid in a candy store. But the other girls Becky mentioned, and even a few she didn't, weren't the ones I had been thinking about since 7th grade. In other words, they were attractive, some even sexy, but they weren't Becky. If Becky gives me exclusivity, I thought, then there will be exclusivity. I smiled at her and said, I can be faithful, and I was. Over the next month, the girls Becky had mentioned, and a few she hadn't, did try to win me over, but I wasn't interested. Why would I be? Becky had set a new standard. She was my platinum standard. But things changed when we returned to school. One morning, as we were walking from our 10 o'clock classes to the student cafeteria, I casually asked her what she wanted to do on Saturday night. I'm going to the Tim McGraw concert. Damn, girl, couldn't you have given me more of a heads up? I'm not sure I can get tickets last minute. Greg already bought them. I stopped in my tracks. Greg? Yeah, I'm going with Greg. Greg was a guy who had transferred from another university and was in several of our business classes. I let her words sink in. Let me get this straight. You're going on a date with Greg Mortison this Saturday? That's right. By then, we had reached the dining room, and Becky turned to go inside. I kept walking. I heard her call out, "Wait, Harry," but I ignored her and hurried off. That afternoon, we both had a business class, but thankfully we had assigned seats, so I didn't have to sit next to her. She sat near the front, 2 seats away from Greg, which I couldn't help but notice. I was seated in the back, far enough to leave before she could catch up to me. For the rest of the day, we didn't have any shared activities, but I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. That evening at work, I tried to keep my distance, but Becky wasn't making it easy. Finally, about 10 minutes before the end of the shift, she approached me. "What's wrong with you, Harry? Why are you acting like this?" I looked at her coldly. "You're in college, Miss Courtney, so you can't be that dense. What did you think would happen when you told me you were going on a date with another guy? It's not like that, Harry. He just had concert tickets and asked if I wanted to go. You know how much I love Tim McGraw. Then, Miss Courtney, you should have asked me to get tickets when you found out about the concert. But you didn't, did you? Remember our first night together? When you talked about fidelity and demanded exclusivity? I didn't realize that only applied to me. Silly me. Shame on me for being so naive." Her face went pale. "That's not how it is, Harry. Isn't it? Well, now I know our relationship is so fragile that it crumbles over a concert ticket. If you'll excuse me, I need to go find a date for Friday." I turned and walked away from her. That night, I told my mom everything and asked her not to take any calls from Becky. I went out to the patio, sat down at my desk, and started working on a paper I had due next week. After dinner, I decided to follow through with what I told Becky. I was going to find a date for Friday. Then an idea hit me, one that made me smile with a hint of mischief. Who better to take out than one of the girls Becky was so worried about the night we first got together? My first choice was Sarah, but even though she had told me to call if things didn't work out with Becky, she was still Becky's best friend. No matter how mad I was, I didn't want to ruin their friendship. So I decided to call Nancy Wilder instead. To my surprise, she agreed to the date right away. The question, "What about Becky?" only came after she said yes. I told her Becky had decided to date other guys and expected me to just go along with it. But that wasn't going to happen. We set a time for Friday and I got back to working on my essay. I managed to avoid Becky at school, but not at work. Still, I couldn't understand her sarcastic attitude when she saw me. "Mr. Macho got a date for Friday?" she asked, mocking me. I matched her sarcasm. "None of your business, Miss Courtney." She smirked. "I thought so. Call me when you're tired of hearing no." I walked away and tried to avoid her for the rest of my shift. The next day, I was sitting in the cafeteria, reviewing notes from my last class, when Becky walked in. She glanced around, saw me, and headed straight for me. I quickly gathered my things and stood up just as she sat down. "Where are you going, Harry?" I ignored her and walked out. That Friday, I picked Nancy up at 7, and we went to the Outback Steakhouse for dinner. Afterward, we headed to the VFW for the Friday night dance. We had a great time, though a few people gave us curious looks when they realized I wasn't with Becky. We left around 11 and stopped by the Village Inn for cake and coffee. We'd been there about 15 minutes when Becky and her date walked in. They were laughing and enjoying each other's company until Becky spotted us. The surprise on her face was unmistakable when she saw that I had a date, and with one of the girls she had been worried about. Her eyes met mine, and I turned my attention back to Nancy. Sensing the tension, Nancy said quietly, Becky hasn't stopped staring at us since she sat down. Are you sure it's over between you two? I shrugged. Think about it, Nance. Is she sitting with me or with another guy? I just didn't want to be the one to ruin your relationship. Relax. I didn't call you until after she told me she wanted to date other guys. Nancy still seemed uneasy. Can we leave? I don't feel comfortable with her sitting there staring at us. We left the restaurant, and once we were in the car, I asked, "What do you want to do next?" She surprised me by saying, "I was hoping you'd take me to a motel." My shock must have shown because she quickly added, "Let's be honest, Harry, you don't have strong feelings for me beyond sympathy. It's just sympathy, right? We don't have a future. Just a few dates." I didn't know what to say, so I nodded. She continued, "I had a great relationship with Rory. We made love 3 or 4 times a week until he left for Florida. I haven't had sex since, and I can't wait any longer." I was puzzled. "Nance, you're a beautiful girl. There must be plenty of guys who'd want to date you. They're out there, but all they want is sex. And while my body wants that too, I don't want to turn my life into a series of one-night stands. So what makes me different?" "You're a good guy, Harry. You're not an a-hole. And Paulina said you wouldn't let me down." I chuckled. "But according to you, I'm just a temporary fix. No deep feelings, just sympathy, right?" She smiled softly. "There are different kinds of one-night connections, Harry. Some guys just want to brag. Hey, I hooked up with Nancy. Then there are others who wake up the next morning, smile, say thanks, and leave without making a big deal of it. Paulina said you're the second kind, the kind of guy who can have a no-strings relationship." I thought about it for a moment and then smiled at her. "I guess I can be your plaything for the night." Nancy enjoyed the night as much as Paulina and Becky had. But since I had to take her home, we didn't spend the whole night together. However, we did make plans to meet again the next day. On Saturday, we spent the day at a motel, and on Sunday, we met at her house while her parents were out. By the time I got home that evening, I realized I liked the setup. Sex without commitment. Nancy and I could remain friends with benefits as long as she was willing, and there would be no hard feelings when it ended. We agreed to stay exclusive while we were seeing each other, even though it was just for fun. I avoided Becky at school on Monday, but I couldn't dodge her at work. To my surprise, she was friendly and didn't bring up the situation. I was relieved, but also a little annoyed. I didn't want drama, but part of me felt she should at least try to fix what she had messed up. Finally, on Wednesday, Becky brought it up. I was getting a Coke from the break room when she walked in. She grabbed a bottle of water and sat down across from me. "I heard you and Nancy Wilder have been spending a lot of time together," she said, without looking at me. I took a sip of my drink and nodded. Was I so easily replaced? "As I recall, you ended our so-called exclusive relationship, which gave me the chance to meet others. Nancy was the first to say yes when I started calling." She scowled. "Damn it, Harry. Why can't you understand that going to the concert with Greg didn't mean anything?" I set my drink down, my patience running out. "Maybe it didn't mean much to you, but it meant a lot to me. It meant I couldn't trust you." "That's ridiculous, Harry." "No, it's not, Becky, and you know it." She sighed in frustration. "Do you really believe that?" "Of course I do, Becky. Here's how I imagine it. You mention to someone that you love Tim McGraw, Greg overhears, sees an opportunity, buys tickets, and lets you know he has an extra one. You couldn't get a ticket because they sold out, so Greg was your only option." She crossed her arms. "For God's sake, Harry, it was just a concert." I shook my head. "No, it wasn't just a concert. Greg knew you were my girlfriend. Everyone did. He went after you anyway, and you went along with it." I stood up, checking the time. "I need to get back to work." Without waiting for her response, I walked out. After that conversation, Becky started avoiding me, which I was relieved about. The drama was finally over. Nancy and I lasted another 2 months before she ended things. She met someone she thought could be a long-term partner. I wished her the best, and life moved on. With a busy schedule full of essays and research projects, I stayed away from dating for a while. Becky and I were both studying to be business managers, so we still shared classes. We were cordial, but we didn't talk much, usually just exchanging nods when we crossed paths. When I finally got back into dating, I would occasionally see Becky with other guys. It was never the same person, and I never saw her with Greg again. Meanwhile, the girl I was dating was the same one every time Becky saw us. Another one of the girls Becky had been worried about when we first got together. However, this time was different. Marge wasn't one of those girls who just wanted to see what I was like in bed. She was actually a bit cautious when I first asked her out. It was at a VFW dance, and I had come alone, not looking for anything serious, just wanting to dance and have a good time. I had been there for about an hour when I saw Marge come in, sit at a table, and check her watch constantly. I walked up to her and asked, "Want some company while you wait? We could chat or dance until your friend arrives." Marge smiled and said, "That sounds nice." I sat down and asked, "Will they mind?" "Not he. It's Anna I'm waiting for," she replied. "What happened to Mike?" I asked. "Chelsea Marks happened," she said with a hint of bitterness. Sensing it was better not to dig deeper, I asked her to dance. Anna never showed, so Marge and I spent the evening talking, dancing, and enjoying ourselves. By the end of the night, I asked her out on a date. "I'm not sure, Harry," she said. "I just got rid of a jerk, and I'm not looking to date anyone right now." "So, are you calling me an a-hole?" I teased. "I don't know, Harry. Are you? You dated Becky and she dumped you. Then you dated Nancy and she dumped you too. So what's wrong with you, Harry?" She continued, "I'm not stupid. I know why those girls went after you. They wanted to see if what they heard was true. Apparently, it was because they stayed for a while, but eventually they both left. The real question is, why?" I looked at her for a moment before saying, "I could tell you, but you'd probably think I'm full of it. If you really want to know, ask Becky or Nancy." "Thanks for the dance, Marge. Take care," I said, getting up and leaving. The next day was a work Saturday, and Dad decided I had learned all I could about shipping and receiving, so he moved me to accounting. That meant I didn't work alongside Becky anymore. At lunch, I was sitting in the break room with a Coke and some chips when Becky walked in and, for the first time in weeks, sat down with me. "I got a weird call last night," she said. I kept eating, waiting for her to continue. "Marge Collins called and asked why I left you," she said. "Why'd she do that?" I asked. "You'll have to ask her," Becky replied. "I didn't leave you, Harry. You pushed me away by acting stupid. I didn't want it to end, but you made it happen. So go tell that to Marge." I got up and went back to work. 2 weeks later, I saw Marge again at another VFW dance. This time, I was sitting alone since all the bar stools were taken. Marge walked in, saw me, and approached. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. "Are you sure you want to be seen with a jerk?" I replied a bit coldly. She sat down and said, "That's not the attitude we need. If this is going to work, we need to see if there's anything worth building on. You asked me out, Harry, and I didn't say no. I just had some questions, and you pointed me to where I could find the answers. So I did. Now the only question is, when are we going on that first date?" "How about tomorrow?" I suggested. "Dinner and a movie." "I like that," she said with a smile. "Now let's go dance." We spent the night dancing, drinking, and chatting. I found out Marge had called both Becky and Nancy. Nancy had already told me she regretted breaking up and that her new guy didn't compare. Marge eventually shared Becky's reaction, too. Becky had been upset when she learned I was seeing Marge, hoping I'd come back to her after my fling with Nancy. She apologized for what happened between us. I shrugged and said, "That was her choice. Let's go dance." The date with Marge went great. I got a nice kiss when I dropped her off and set up another date for Tuesday, which led to several more. After our 5th date, as I walked her to the door, she asked, "Are you going to make the first move, or do I have to?" I hesitated, remembering our earlier conversation about not being like other guys. "Oh, come on, Harry," she said. "We've been over this. It's time we went to bed." She opened the door and led me in. It was a long night, but since it was my free Saturday, I didn't have to worry about work. The next morning, over breakfast, she asked, "What's the plan for today?" "Whatever you want," I replied. "Don't think you can keep up all day and still be good tonight," she teased. "I thought you loved me, not just saw me as a toy," I joked. "Well, you like it," she grinned. "Probably," I admitted. We had a great weekend together, but after the school year ended, Marge left for Arizona and never came back. I never heard from her again. During the summer, I worked full-time, and so did Becky. We were polite, but kept our distance, just exchanging greetings in passing. One Wednesday, while I was in the break room, Becky sat across from me. "Harry, I need a big favor," she said. "I need a date for Friday and Saturday." "Why me?" I asked. "Because my family loves you." "I don't get it." "It's my cousin Carol's wedding. My family doesn't like my boyfriend and told me not to bring him. They love you, though, and always said I shouldn't have let you go. Please help me." I didn't have any plans, and since it didn't feel like a real date, I agreed. Becky explained the details. We'd drive to her uncle's house in Fairmont on Friday, relax by the pool before the rehearsal dinner, and then either leave after the wedding Saturday night or stay until Sunday. I thought she might use the car ride to suggest getting back together, but she only talked about school and work. She mentioned her dad was moving her into purchasing, which I already knew, and that he was rotating her through different departments in the family business. What she didn't mention was that her uncle had a mansion. When we arrived, I met her Uncle Aaron, call me Ron, and her Aunt Rabbit, call me Tubby, along with her cousin Carol, the bride-to-be. Tubby said she had set us up in the West Wing and invited us to join them by the pool. Becky showed me my room, told me to change into swim trunks, and meet her in the hallway. When I came out, Becky was waiting wearing a swimsuit that barely qualified as one, grinning as she knew the effect it would have. "Lead the way," I said, trying to stay calm. When we got to the pool, I noticed there were two, an Olympic-sized one for laps and a smaller kidney-shaped one for lounging. I also realized Becky wasn't the exception. Most of Carol's friends were wearing revealing swimsuits, just like hers. Even the older women, though were dressed more modestly. One older woman stood out, nearly 6 feet tall with long black hair, green eyes, and an amazing figure. Becky caught me staring and said, "No, you wouldn't." I quickly agreed, "No, I wouldn't." "Take her to your cave and keep her busy," Becky joked, pulling me toward her. "Aunt Abby, this is Harry," Becky introduced. "Harry, meet my Aunt Abby." Aunt Abby gave me a once-over and said, "If you lose him, give me a call. He looks tasty." Becky laughed and said, "Watch out, Harry. Aunt Abby's been through 4 husbands. She'll chew you up and spit you out." Abby chuckled. "I'm not that bad." "Says the woman with 4 ex-husbands," Becky teased. Aunt Abby grinned. "Don't push me or I might steal him from you." Becky turned to me and asked, "Could she steal you?" I paused before saying, "Yeah, she could." They both laughed, and Becky said, "I better get you away from her." As we walked away, I glanced back, and Aunt Abby winked. Beauty clearly ran in Becky's family. The guys at the pool were the only ones I hadn't met. I introduced myself after jumping in, and one guy came over. "You with Becky?" he asked. I nodded. "I'm Tom marrying Carol," he said, shaking my hand. "If I had a shot, I'd be going for Aunt Abby." I laughed and told him, "Good luck. She said she'd steal me if she wanted." Tom laughed. "Go for it." We swam for a bit, and then Becky said it was time to get ready for dinner. Becky looked amazing, and I wasn't too bad in my suit and tie. The rehearsal and dinner went smoothly, and we sat with Becky's cousins. They spent the evening trying to figure out my relationship with Becky. She let them believe we might have a future, but I didn't correct them. When the band started, I danced with Becky's mom, Aunt Tubby, and even her grandma, which Becky found hilarious. "When we get married, I'll have to keep you on a tight leash," she joked. I was too busy enjoying myself to remind her I was just there for the weekend. The best part of the night was when Aunt Abby took my hand and led me to the dance floor. "I wish I could get to know you better," she said playfully, but with a serious undertone. After a pause, she added, "Do I have a chance?" Startled, I asked, "What?" "You're fooling everyone, but not me," she said. "It's obvious Becky's in love with you, and you don't feel the same. Am I right?" Caught off guard, I nodded. "Tell me," she pressed. "I'm just her date for the weekend," I admitted. She didn't want to come alone, so I agreed. "There's more to this," she said, eyes narrowing. "Becky's feelings are clear to everyone." When the music stopped, I tried to lead her back, but she held my hand and said, "No, come with me." She took me out to the terrace and asked me to tell her everything. Sitting next to her, I felt the same attraction everyone must feel around her. She used that charm, and I found myself spilling everything. She listened and then laughed. "Oh, poor boy. Do you really think girls want you just because you're good in bed? Has it ever occurred to you that after being with you, they might want to stay because they've realized you're more than just Zex? How many of them actually stayed?" "They all left me," I said, shaking my head. "So Zex must be all I've got going for me." "That's nonsense, Harry, and you know it," she said firmly. "You knew what you had with Nancy from the start, and with Marge, you have no idea why she disappeared. She could have been in an accident, lying in a hospital somewhere for all you know. And as for Becky, she didn't leave. You pushed her away. Why couldn't you accept what she said and move forward?" I didn't have an answer, so I stayed quiet. "I can tell from the way my niece acts that she really wants to be with you. Why not give it another shot, Harry? What do you have to lose?" We sat in silence for a moment before she spoke again. "So, are you really that good in bed, Harry?" "Some girls seem to think so," I said quietly. "Well, I'll make you a deal," she said, leaning in. "Give my niece another chance. If it doesn't work out, I'll sleep with you myself. It's a win-win for you, Harry. Think about it." She stood up and said, "The music's playing again. Let's dance." As we walked back inside, I could feel all eyes on us. Everyone was wondering what I'd been doing with Aunt Abby out on the terrace. We danced to 3 songs, and then I escorted her back to her table. When I returned to mine, Becky was still on the dance floor with her cousin, so I avoided any questions, for the moment at least. Becky stayed on the dance floor for another song, this time dancing with the best man. I was watching them when Becky's mom pulled me up from my seat and onto the dance floor. "So, what were you and my sister doing out on the terrace?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. Trying to be lighthearted, I said, "She wanted my body, but I fought her off." "Don't give me that nonsense, young man," she said sternly. "First, we both know if Abby wanted you, she would have had you. Second, Abby would never poach a man from her family. And third, she loves Becky. She's her godmother, for heaven's sake. She wouldn't hurt her for anything. She just wanted to know your intentions toward Becky, that's all." "You think we were out there that long? Just for that?" I asked, irritation creeping into my voice. "Just answering questions," I said, growing frustrated. "If you need to know what happened, ask Abby herself." The music stopped, and I led her back to the table, but she grabbed my hand, trying to stop me. "I'm not done talking to you yet," she said firmly. "This is what's called a conflict of interest, Mrs. Courtney. You want to talk, but I don't," I said, pulling my hand away. I left her standing there and returned to my table. When I got back, Becky was sitting there, her expression a mix of disbelief and confusion. "You just walked away from my mom and left her standing on the dance floor?" she asked. "Yes," I replied flatly. "How could you do that? How could you be so rude?" "It was easy," I said, my frustration bubbling up. "I'm tired of the women in your family meddling where they don't belong." "Is that what happened with Aunt Abby?" Becky asked, clearly upset. "See? Even you're doing it now," I snapped. "Everyone's dying to know what happened between me and Aunt Abby. It's nobody's business but hers and mine. Enough already, let's dance." "I don't think so," Becky said, crossing her arms. "You've just managed to ruin the mood." "Oh no, don't pin this on me," I shot back. "It was your attitude when I sat down that started all this. Instead of accusing me, you should have waited and talked to your mom to find out what really happened." I stood up, and Becky asked, "Where are you going?" "You don't want to dance, and I don't want to sit here and drink. I'm going back to my room." I left her sitting there and went back to my room at Uncle Aaron's. As I lay in bed, I considered packing up and heading home, but I decided to be responsible for once. I had brought Becky here, so I needed to take her home. Not that she couldn't manage on her own, but doing the right thing was important. I was nearly asleep when I heard a knock on the door. I got up, reaching for the doorknob when I heard, "Open up, Harry, it's Abby." I opened the door, but instead of Aunt Abby, Becky walked in, closing the door behind her. "I wasn't sure you'd open it for me, but I knew you'd open it for Aunt Abby," she said, a bit frustrated. "You can be such an a-hole sometimes, but you're my a-hole. You need to get over it, Harry. You're mine, and I'm not leaving, whether you like it or not." I raised an eyebrow and asked, "So, I don't have a say in this?" "No," she said firmly, shaking her head. "I've decided I'll be the mother of your kids and your bedmate until death do us part." I laughed, but Becky remained serious. "Okay, I admit I acted stupid when Greg waved those Tim McGraw tickets in front of me. But what were you thinking back then? All he got was a goodnight kiss on the cheek, nothing more. I never went out with him again, even though he asked a dozen times." She softened, then continued, "I realized you'd probably leave if I didn't gather the strength to follow you. I remember someone once told me, if it's worth having, it's worth fighting for. So here we are. I'm not letting you go. You can push me away or say, don't think like that, but I'll always be there. If you're on a date, I'll be your shadow, Harry. Always." Becky sat down beside me and added, "I have a tool, you know. Your dad likes me. I'll be a great daughter-in-law and give him wonderful grandchildren. I'll even ask him to make sure we always work together, so I'm close enough to wear you down. Don't resist, Harry. I always get what I want, and I want you." 3 months after graduation, we got married. Over the next 5 years, she gave my parents 3 beautiful grandchildren. Looking back, I'm glad Becky believed everything worth having was worth fighting for, and that she got what she wanted. I developed a great relationship with Becky's family, especially the women. At every social event or dance, I'd spend most of the evening with them, including Aunt Abby, who was now on her 6th husband. At one of the dances, Aunt Abby said, "I guess I'll never get to find out what you're like in bed, will I?" Knowing how to push buttons, I smiled and replied, "I don't know about that. You're Becky's favorite aunt. If you ask her, she might let you borrow me." Aunt Abby stopped, took a step back, then burst into loud laughter. Everyone in the room turned to see what was going on. I don't think anyone had ever seen Aunt Abby lose her cool in public like that before. From the looks on the faces of the other women, I knew I'd be telling this story later. I escorted Aunt Abby back to her seat and excused myself to use the restroom. When I returned, I saw Becky and Aunt Abby talking, both smiling. I sat down, and Becky turned to me and said, "Aunt Abby and I were just talking. You know she's my favorite aunt, right? Well, she has a request." I glanced at Aunt Abby, who had a mischievous grin on her face. I thought to myself, "Oh my gosh, Harry, what have you gotten yourself into now?" They both saw my expression and burst out laughing.